Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the stream. I'm really excited to be introducing sPhilosophy. He's a friend of mine. Let's see, how do I do this? Seems like you and I should be bigger on this screen. I'm not sure why it's like that.
That's why I said if you go into the StreamYard, you have to click there are different setting options for how you want to display the participants. You have to click there. Yep,
There we
there it
go.
is.
Very good. So yeah, everybody who watches my channel knows already. I'm so dysfunctional with this stuff. I really, this is like a learning process for me, and it's like I one step at a time. Anyway, I apologize for that. So just real quick I'm introducing sPhilosophy to the channel again. Really excited to have him stop by. We had a great discussion a few weeks ago, and looking forward to having this conversation. sPhilosophy and I have had several back and forths about free will, whether or not we have free will or not. And Ace has made some interesting comments that I want to be able to respond to about not only whether or not we have free will, but what the implications of this might mean for the skeptics' worldview, if you want to call it that, quote unquote worldview. And so I'm looking forward to getting into all that with him. We will be opening up the panel like I do every Sunday at some point. So if you guys want to join the conversation, now again, Ace has been very gracious to stop by, but he's got a very busy schedule, especially on Sundays. So he's got to do a hard stop in 2 hours. He's already informed me of that. So if it comes time for him to go, I don't want you guys giving him a hard time and be like, oh, he ran away. No. He's already told me ahead of time that he's got to do a hard stop. It has to be that way. And I totally respect his schedule, and just so glad that he was able to make time to share with us today. So I'm going to turn it over to Ace here in a second to introduce himself. Just kind of want to let you guys know kind of what the format's going to be. I'm going to have Ace make a presentation at some point here after he introduces himself. Actually, we'll go over those rules here in a little bit. First, let me just let him introduce himself. But I want to tell you guys, thank you so much for the support. The channel has been growing very steadily. I think I'm coming up on 170 subscribers already. It's been just over 2 months. I think we're well over 15,000 views on the videos. So those numbers are staggering, considering how little time I have to put into this channel and to promote the channel. That's all basically because you guys are spreading the word and sharing the videos and interacting with the videos. The video that I put out on objective morality, that's got like, I think around 500 views, which for a video like that, that's a lot of views. It may be a little less than that, but there's like well over 100 comments on that video alone. There's been a lot of great discussions in the comment section about that. Really appreciate all the feedback. So I'm so grateful to everybody who's supported this effort. And it's really a channel that's built around a community. I don't consider it even to be my channel. I'm in charge of kind of setting the rules and stuff like that and organizing it. But I do see it as basically a community effort. It's a group channel. So everybody is welcome to bring their ideas and their viewpoints to join the conversation. The only one rule that I really have is that we are going to be respectful to each other. And I'm really serious about that rule. I don't care what your viewpoints are, and I don't care about getting the pushback. I encourage people to bring different ideas. But the one rule that we do have here is we are going to be respectful to each other. So let me turn it over to Ace and let him introduce his channel. Then he'll throw it back to me, and I'll just go over kind of the format for today. Go ahead, Ace.
Yeah. First of all, OE, thank you. Excuse me. Yeah, I go by sPhilosophy, or A. That is the name of my YouTube channel. I've been on YouTube for a couple years now, making my own content. I had been interacting with people on YouTube a little bit before that, and then started making my own content. On my channel, a lot of it has been a focus on Christian theology and what constitutes Christian theology. But I do often talk about other topics because I am a Christian, and therefore I do subscribe to the idea that God exists and that position should be defended. So I do discuss the ideas related to the question of does God exist, which is the more rational worldview, theism or atheism or skepticism, or however you want to define it, all kinds of philosophical topics. And on my channel, I do have a link to Substack. I haven't got much content on my Substack yet, but again, I do have more plans for my channel. But I'll just kind of end it there. My, sPhilosophy YouTube channel. I have open discussions. I have educational content. Again, right now, most of it is about the Christian worldview and what constitutes true Christian faith. But there is information on there about, atheism versus theism and evolution versus creationism. So I think that should interest people. And we're going to be discussing one of my favorite topics today, which is free will. So I hope this should be an interesting discussion. I thank Daniel for bringing me on. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you and getting into this conversation more. I'm so busy, as I keep telling people, just to kind of let you guys know why I don't put more time into this channel, because I really enjoy interacting with everybody. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to reach out to people this way. But I took a promotion at work. I was already busy before I did that, and now I'm ridiculously busy. So my time is so limited. But this conversation about free will is something that I've really been wanting to take a deeper dive into, because I think that there are a lot of implications with how we deal with people when it comes to culpability and the moral questions and justice and things of this nature. And as everybody probably knows who watches my channel, I'm an agnostic. I really don't spend a lot of time or energy arguing the does God exist question. I do enjoy getting into philosophical debates and discussing logic, right, and how we reason our positions out. So I'm willing to have discussions about specific arguments, just to pick the arguments apart, like the Kalam cosmological argument or tag or something like that. I don't mind having those conversations. But as far as does a God exist or not, I'm strictly agnostic about that position. I don't think it's possible to know anything about the supernatural. So I think that the say yes or no to me just doesn't make any sense, but that's my position. Free will, I'm going to believe in objective morality. Even though I'm agnostic, I do believe that morality is objective. There are moral truths out there. And so, when you start talking about free will, how do we deal with criminals? How do we deal with the justice system and things of that nature? All this ties together with things that I'm very passionate about. And I will be doing much more work on this particular topic moving forward. I'm just kind of scratching the surface of my own research. So I'll be looking forward to hearing what Ace has to say. I find him to be, very intelligent. He's very articulate. He's able to express his ideas in a clear and concise manner. So I think it'll be a great opportunity for us to have a good back and forth here. What we're going to do is I'm going to basically, this is not a formal debate. We're just going to have a conversation, but I'm going to give us each like a few minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, whatever it takes. It's casual, to kind of lay out our own argument at the outset here. And then maybe we can get into a conversation from there. And again, I will be opening up the panel for everyone to join the conversation at some point. So if you have some questions, either for me or for Ace, or just want to bring your own input into the situation, I do welcome that. So I'll turn it back over to Ace and let him give his case for free will.
Yeah, I'm just going to set my clock for 5 minutes. That'll be the maximum amount of time I'm going to speak. So I don't want to hog all the time. Yeah, so when you're talking about free will, the first thing you're always going to want to do is define what we mean by that. And this is something difficult, because I think there are different ways you can define free will. And also, once you define free will and figure out what it is, you start to see that there's I never started that clock, did I? Yeah, let me get this going. There we go. That was about 30 seconds, but okay. So I would define free will, and a lot of people define it this way, so this is not my definition, as the ability to have chosen otherwise. That's one way of thinking about free will. So when you're at a moment in time, let's say you're you're thinking about eating breakfast, and you have an apple in front of you and an orange in front of you. Let's say you choose the apple, and you want the apple, you pick it and you start eating it. Well, you can ask the question, if we have free will, could you have done something else? So like if we were to go take a time machine and go back in time to that moment you choose, could you have potentially chosen the orange and eaten the orange as well? Now, if you say yes, then what you're basically saying is that at that moment in time, your decision, the future, was indeterminate. And that gets the idea of determinism. If our decision thoughts are determined, then you would have to say that decision could not have gone other than what it had. But if you admit that the person could have legitimately chosen between one or the other choice, then the future is indeterminate. And the reason that's so interesting is because according to the it's not strictly atheist, but certainly the materialist, the scientific materialist concept of reality, everything is determined by the laws of physics. So physics aren't going to do something differently at a moment in time, depending on what the human wants. They're just going to do whatever they do. The molecules in your body are going to go forward in one path. So once you start to embrace the idea that people can choose between various options at a moment in time, you are seriously challenging the going scientific paradigm, which says that everything operates according to deterministic natural forces. So that is why the conversation about free will is so important. And it also touches on the nature of the mind. Free will means you have a will. Well, where does the will come from? Does it come from a mind that acts independently of the physical body? I think it has to, because if you're going to say our mind is just a product of brain chemistry, well, again, chemistry operates according to what we know about the laws of physics, nature, whatever you want to call it. Brain chemistry, or all chemistry, is strictly deterministic. So it doesn't allow for a range of motions at a given point in time. It's just going to proceed according to whether it is determined by the laws of physics and how the particles and molecules are interacting at that moment in time in your brain. So your brain, your consciousness, your thoughts, which includes your decisions, are what in this conceptualization what would be called an epiphenomenon of brain activity. That is to say, they don't have any causal authority within themselves. So that's why things are determined that way, because you can't have free will according to that concept of reality. So how can you have free will? Well, you would, in my opinion, this is something you wouldn't have to have a mind that exists and operates independently to some extent of the brain and the human body. Okay, well, if you have a mind that exists independently of the physical body, that means the physical isn't all there is. That would mean you have a soul. So the soul in my book is kind of almost synonymous with the mind. Our mind, because it is not dependent and contingent upon the physical body, does survive death. When you start to tie all these things, you see the free will conversation leads to so many other avenues. And I've spoken for about 5 minutes now, so I'm going to shut things down. But these are kind of avenues we could explore in today's discussion about free will, including whether we just have free will at all. So that's kind of the opening that I would give.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you're right. There's already so much to unpack there that we may have to do like a part 1, 2, and even 3 to this conversation.
I'm down.
I don't think 2 hours is going to be enough time. And I want to include the audience as well. You're right, because that's another thing I didn't even mention in my opening. I talked about ethics and culpability and justice and things like that, but you're absolutely right. The mind-body problem, as they call it, right? The hard problem of consciousness. These now factor into this. Cartesian dualism essentially states that we've got the mind separate from the body, right? So how does that factor into the free will conversation? And I do want to get into some of the things that you brought up. You brought up the how free will creates a problem for the creation or the materialist, and so I think that's an interesting conversation to have, is how that actually creates a problem or leads credence to a creationist viewpoint, because I don't see that connection, to be honest with you. I mean, you can tie it together if you want to, creationism. Well, we'll get into that later. So that's a good opening. That gives us a lot to work with. So let me go ahead and let me make my case for why I think that libertarian free will just is demonstrably false. So let me go through a couple of definitions here just real quick, and we may have to parse this out a little bit. But basically, libertarian free will is that states that decisions can be made free of any external cause or influence. And I just think that there's no way that makes any sense. Determinism, then, as Ace said, this is the idea that all decisions are determined by external cause or influence. So it'll literally be the exact opposite. Free will and determinism are the exact opposites of each other, right? Decisions can be made free of any external cause or influence, or they cannot be made they are determined by external causes or influence. There's actually a third position, which I have referred to it as soft determinism, because people, so when it comes to free will, to really understand that these are two opposite sides of the conversation, they refer to free will as libertarian free will, and they refer to determinism as hard determinism, right? So there's no gray area between those two, within those definitions, I should say. But there is a middle ground to this. And I've referred to it in the past as soft determinism, but it's actually technically in philosophy would be called compatibilism. Okay. So this says that while most decisions are heavily influenced by external cause or influence, there is still room for independent decision making. So that's kind of what I'm working with here. And I would say the way that I look at this conversation about free will and the external cause or influence, how much of a role does that play? I try and go back to as far back as you can in a person's existence. So a person, basically, you got a zygote, right? Then you at some point turn into a fetus. Okay, you start to develop the brain at this point. As the brain is developing, you're inside the womb, and you are being solely influenced by chemicals, right? And molecules and things that your mother is ingesting, right? The food she's taking in, not only that, but her own body chemicals are affecting you and your growth at this point. There's clearly no free will or decision making happening on your part because you're a fetus at this point. And yet this is the development. This is where it all starts, completely outside of your control. When we're born, okay, we're still not making decisions. Okay, everything is happening instinctually and naturally. Okay, the food that we're being fed. Does our mother drink alcohol while she's breastfeeding? Was she a drug addict when she was pregnant with this? What kind of music? What were her hormone levels at? While she was pregnant? Same thing with birth. What kind of environment are we being born into? Do the parents fight all the time? Are they yelling and screaming at each other, beating each other, throwing shit around the house? Or is it a loving, supportive environment? What kind of music is being played in the background? What kind of auditory stimulations are we getting as a baby, as a newborn baby, right? In our first year or two of development, especially that first year. And again, there's no decision-making processes. Nobody that I've ever spoken to thinks we're actually making choices at this point yet, right? We're just literally being developed. And as a response, our development is a response to our external environment explicitly, and internal chemical processes, right? All natural. And so by the time that we actually get to a point as a tiny little child to where we are actually making choices, we are so developed at this point by everything external to ourselves. So how is it that now suddenly we're going to just have free will pop into the situation? Where does free will develop? How does it develop? How do we now separate what would be a free will choice from a choice that's heavily influenced by our external environment? The other problem I have with the libertarian free will claim, is that it assumes that we can make decisions, even as adults, free of external cause or influence. But we know that because of cause and effect, one action leads to another action, it's a chain of actions, and there you get a chain of reactions. So how are you breaking links in that chain to insert free will? It seems very arbitrary, very haphazard, and it doesn't seem to have any explanatory power to me whatsoever. So I'm unconvinced that there's any such thing as libertarian free will. Where I'm undecided, because I haven't been able to look into this super deeply yet, and I'm still developing my own theory on this, is where do we fall between compatibilism and hard determinism? According to experts who support hard determinism, there are still some kind of choices being made, but I haven't understood how they're making that claim. That to me sounds like compatibilism at this point. So I'm going to, at this point, be sitting on compatibilism as what seems to make the most sense, because we do feel like we have a certain ability to reason our way through life, right? This is where we get culpability from, and where a lot of moral arguments come from is what would reasonable people do if they were all in the same situation, right? So I do agree with A's, what he said about if you rewind the clock, would you take path A or path B? I think that's where the question of determinism versus free will lies, is would you always continue to take the same path, or is it possible that you could go either direction if you rerun the clock? So we're going to have a back and forth about that. In my closing, I just want to play one very just quick 10-second clip here. This is, if I can get this on stage, you guys have to bear with me. I'm really bad about all this stuff here. So let me bring this up and let me put him front and center here. This is Robert Sapolsky. He's an author. He's written a book called, I believe it's called Determinism, and which he has done recently, but he's written a few books on this. He's a professor and a neuroscientist, I believe, neurobiologist. And so he does talk about this a lot. So let me see if I could get, can I get this to play? There we go.
Regular people on the street and stuff who believe there's things like atoms and we're made up of them, and cells and things of that sort. And the common belief is, nonetheless, that material view of the universe is compatible with believing in free will. And I'm in the subset of people who disagree. And in fact, I'm way out on the lunatic fringe in arguing that there's no free will whatsoever. And I think that's based on what we know by now about where behavior comes from. And to summarize a lot of haranguing in the book, when you look at our knowledge these days, all we are is the sum of the biology over which we had no control and the environment that it interacts with over which we have
no control. So that's really where I'm coming down on this. And I think Robert Sapolsky's sums that up the best. So let me pull him off the stage, poor guy. We're going to put you in the back room there, buddy. And Ace, why don't you go ahead and, if you want to we'll just start a back and forth. What do you think about what I've said so far?
Yeah, it's all really interesting. I can tell we're coming, and somebody in the comments section I see has already indicated where probably the definitional differences we're coming at this from are, which is the idea of do we have what's called an agency at all? See, a lot of times the concepts of free will and agency are kind of used interchangeably, but the idea a lot of people wanted to get at, and Sapolsky, who I haven't read his works, but I'm familiar with him, what he's talking about there is are humans, do they have any capacity for independent agency whatsoever, is one of the first things that we have to establish. I think that's what everyone really wants to know. And Sapolsky, in a way, he is very consistent with his assumptions about reality and how it leads to certain inevitable conclusions about free will and agency. On the other hand, these people have a very serious internal contradiction going that I will hide. But basically, here's the thing. If we're gonna, I hear skeptics say a lot, what's the evidence? What is, I just want to see what is something we can look at and prove what it is we believe. And in my opinion, the starting point for everyone should be that humans do have free will, at least of some kind, and that they do have agency, because that's what we observe. And if you come to a different conclusion, it's not based on observations, because everything we experience within ourselves and external to ourselves suggests that humans are making decisions and do have agency. You would have to overlay it with certain other concepts that have been introduced to you. And you heard him talk about it, which is that, and he stated the assumption that leads to him believing what he does, which is that all we are is biology and cells and atoms, and that's the sum total of our being. There's nothing else. Well, that's not actually a quote unquote fact. That's what he believes. Now, if he's right about that, then he's correct in the other areas of his philosophy. But in my opinion, this is why you have some of these questions. So is there more to the human being or to a living thing's being than just atoms, molecules, and the underlying chemistry? So this is also something that once you assume that, yes, we're just chemistry, we're just atoms, then yes, there's no free will, there's no agency, there cannot be. But that's part of the question. And I think the fact that humans do apparently have free will and autonomous agency suggests strongly, if not proves, that we must have a soul and there must be more to the human being than just the physical body. So I've said a lot. I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, there's a lot to pack there. I think that you made an interesting comment, and it may be just the way we this is just flowing organically. So I'm not sure if you want to stay with that, or maybe we want to rework that a little bit. But it seemed like you said that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seemed like what I heard you say is that we observe agency, we observe free will decision making, and then you said that Robert Sapolsky is making the assumption that we are all just made up of physical matter. And it would seem to me that the observation is actually that we are made up of physical matter, and the assumption would have to be that there's more to it than that. Is that fair?
Well, here's the thing. The problem with the assumption that we know that our senses. Here's why it's not right to assume that we are just physical.
Well, let's wait for the assumption part, but let's the observation. We must both agree that the observation is empirical, right? We can observe, test, measure, and predict the material world, and which we are a part of. We are made up of these atoms, these molecules, right? Potassium, carbon, blah 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 blah. That we can actually test this scientifically. So that should be the observation that we both agree on, right?
We can determine that is at least part of what our being is. So that is the part of our being that is physically observable.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We have not yet gained the ability to observe anything beyond that. But my opinion is that based on how humans behave and the capacities that we have as living beings, and not just humans, but also all living things, that belief, that understanding of basically we're just physical bodies cannot possibly be true, because of the logical conclusion that if it is true, then humans can't be acting autonomously. Because we are a composition of a bunch of chemicals and molecules, that would render it impossible for us to deviate from the laws of nature that would dictate our motion and, by extension, our thoughts. So the fact that we can very obviously, in my opinion, apparently do these things logically necessitates that there is something more to the human being. And when I say human being, I mean all living beings. All living beings, in my opinion, have a mind to some extent. That there is this element of us that is beyond what is directly observable, but is independent, but is indirectly observable.
So the mind being separate from the body. I don't want to. I think that each one of these areas really does need to be discussed, because I don't think we could just sweep one under the carpet, and to try and just stay focused on the free will determinism. We have to. It all does tie together, in my opinion. Yeah. So let's look at this mind-body problem for a second here, because one of the issues that I have against the free will argument also ties directly into the argument in favor of a mind. I don't see why we would think we'd have a mind, or why consciousness would need to be fundamental, because we can affect these things with the brain. We can affect the brain using empirical studies, and this seems to affect what people attribute to mind and consciousness. And so therefore, it seems to me that these would be emergent properties of a brain. That's the clear explanation for it. We do this with brain studies. We do this with hypnosis. We do this. We see this. People do it to themselves by getting inebriated on chemical substances. We have split brain patient studies where, I don't know if you've looked into split brain patient studies, but they're quite fascinating. There was in fact, I maybe should do a little bit of a video about it, because it started out as they were trying to find, I believe it was doing medical research on seizure patients. Right. And there are basically, the brain is what they call a bilateral system. So the right side of the brain operates the left side of the body, and vice versa. And seizure patients, there's a substance that connects the two hemispheres of the brain together, the left and right hemisphere. And the signals pass back and forth between these. And people that were having seizures, they believe there's a problem with this the chemicals, or the electrical signals passing back and forth. And so they started doing these split brain studies to try and deal with seizures. And they found some, just by coincidence, found some phenomenal things out about how the brain, the subconscious works, right? This is one of my other issues one of my other talking points I'd like to discuss at some point, is how the subconscious factors into this, because we have the amygdala, we have the I can't think of what it's called now. The emotions, where the emotions come from. It's the
hippocampus or something like that.
Yeah, it does go. But there's another part of the brain. But anyway, I'll cover. Of course, I'll think of it when I don't need to. But there's another part where the emotions come through. So thoughts start in the subconscious. They work through the emotions, and all this is happening before it gets to the conscious point, to where we're quote unquote making decisions. And when we split these brains in half, what we found is that a person would be sitting there. So fascinating. One of the studies I was looking at, they had the split brain patient, and hit the left side of he's doing something with his left arm, right? It's whatever he's focused on, he's doing with his left arm. And all of a sudden his right arm, picks up a pen and starts writing out this note that he's not even consciously aware of. His right hand is literally independent of any conscious decision-making, writing out a note, while his left arm is doing what he's thinking about doing. They've had other studies where he's got his one arm around his wife, I think it was, and the opposite arm reached out and like struck her or slapped her or something like that. Like, just subconsciously, without him, he's thinking about holding and showing affection to his wife, his partner, or whatever it was. And then suddenly his opposite arm is striking this person. So we've seen this, it's scientifically, and there's many, many studies being done about this, right? And so with all this happening, we know that there's got to be independent, unconscious factors that are completely physical, that are controlling behavior. So at what point is the will superseding this? Or, you know what I mean? That's I don't know. So go ahead. I've talked for too long. Go ahead and take over here.
I'm familiar with the split brain studies and all that, and I'm surprised because the dualists, if you want to call them, have made the strong case, in my opinion, that these actually do prove that there must be a mind independent of the physical brain, because, and this is just one area. Yeah, the mind-body problem. To get not hung up on specifics, we can discuss the split brain cases. It's kind of a little too specific, but just generally, when we're trying to develop a model of reality, we need a model, the best model that encompasses all observations. Okay. So in my opinion, there are two observations that need to be encompassed with any model of how humans are composed, whether it's just physical or physical plus something else, call it a mind or whatever. So in my opinion, of course, no one's denying that we have a physical body, and therefore it's tempting to stop there and say, because this is what we observe, and this is what our eyes and ears, nose, mouth, whatever touch senses detect, then we stop there. But can the purely physical explain everything that is observed, namely the ability of humans to apparently act and make decisions that affect the course of their being? When you start trying to develop a model that explains that as well, what you find is that the physicalist model, if you want to call it that, falls completely short, because in a physicalist model, in a purely physicalist, materialistic model, which is if you zoom into the human being, you try to look at everything that is the foundation of what we are as a person, a thing, whatever, and all you see is chemicals. All chemicals and atoms can do is go in one course of action, like water flowing down a hill. The water is not going to decide it wants to flow uphill or to the side or somewhere else and decide to do that, because it doesn't have a mind. It can't do that. It's just water molecules, and they don't care. They don't care because they can't care. So like that, the molecules in our brain don't care what decision they make. They don't care if the decision leads to a, quote, positive outcome. They don't care if it leads to any outcome. They can't even... The molecules in our brain can't conceive of outcomes. These are things that are composite, that happen in our mind. But if you think about it from the standpoint of a molecule, which is what our bodies would be in this worldview, like Sapolsky outlined, the molecules don't care. So they don't care about making a good decision. So if that's your worldview, then you would have to necessarily come to the belief that determinism is the only thing the only logical possibility when it comes to the question of free will. Once you get anything beyond, even if there's just a little bit of compatibilism, just a little bit, even if you want to say it's determinism plus just a little bit of completely influenced decision making from a subconscious mind, at that point you have to introduce another element. It's just necessary. The materialistic paradigm cannot account for any level of autonomous decision making or agency. So logically, because what we observe is human beings, living things, whatever you want to say, animals too, human beings making decisions, there must logically necessarily be an additional element that exists independently of the physical that is causing or explaining how this is happening.
I'm hearing your words and I'm trying to conceptualize it in my own mind, just like I do when I have a conversation with anybody, as out of respect and as to be as generous as possible to try to really, see things from their perspective, because it helps just with communication but I'm not able to. I'm hearing you say these things, but I'm not hearing you actually connect those dots by saying saying it has to be, but I'm not seeing why does it have to be. I'm not hearing anything that's going to motivate me to think that you're correct, that I don't see this. It seems like if it has to be this way, that there would be something that we could point at and say, this is why it has to be this way. I think there's some of the language that you're using is a bit loaded up, in my opinion. And I'm wondering if that's just because you're convinced it has to be this way. And so to you, it seems obvious, but I think it's a little bit of maybe question begging. And I'm not trying to be critical or disrespectful. I'm just trying to,
if I'm engaging in a logical fallacy, point it out and let's hash it out. I
just think that you're saying that the molecules don't care, and that implies intent. But I don't think intent has that is a whole separate thing that I feel like needs to be independently established before we should even use that type of verbiage, because I think that's where I think the question begging comes in a little bit, is to say the molecules don't care. Well, I'm not sure care is necessarily the wording I would use if we're looking at this. If we're starting in the middle ground and trying to figure out the truth, I think we should be careful about using a word like, do the molecules quote unquote care? I do think that at the most fundamental level, despite the fact that human beings are so manipulative and so dishonest in so many cases, I actually believe that at the fundamental level, which would be we're talking about the molecular level, right? The single-celled organisms, the multi-celled organisms, the most basic level of life, from there on up, actually have a preference for the truth, for quote unquote reality, because it's most beneficial to survival, right? They've got to find the food. They've got to recognize the dangers, the real food, the real dangers. They need to be able to interact with the real world or they won't survive. Human beings at this highly advanced state of what I see as evolution, but we can describe that however we want to, but we both can agree, whether we call it evolution or not, we can agree that human beings are certainly unique to all the other living organisms. I believe that we both agree we are living organisms. I think we're animals. You probably don't like that vernacular, so I can try to avoid that. But we both agree that we are living organisms, and we are probably the most mentally advanced, intellectually advanced living organisms there are, right? So we have this abstraction capability that allows us to now work with deception and manipulate deception and terraform the environment and do things that other organisms just can't do. They just don't have the capacity. So I think at the fundamental level, organisms actually, I wouldn't use the word care, but have a propensity for the truth, right? Because that's what they need to survive. If an organism was deceiving itself at a basic level of where's the food at, where's the predators at, how do I procreate if I can't find a sexual partner or whatever I need to be able to reproduce? I mean, you have to, at a fundamental level, engage with the real world, with reality, right? So I think that these molecules do, quote unquote, care if we're going to use that verbiage. I think they absolutely care, quote unquote, if I was going to use your vernacular there.
Okay, well, I'm also seeing problems with what you're saying. So,
Okay.
but the thing is, like you said, from your own perspective, it's going to seem like you're right and the other person's wrong. So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to, first of all, understand the other person's perspective, and also at the same time try to make sure that we are ourselves being logically consistent. So I think this is a good area of discussion right here that you and I need to focus on and get this locked down of this specific line of questioning right now. So here's the thing. One of the problems I have with what you just said is this idea that the organisms are trying to survive. Now, here's the problem with that. If you do adopt the viewpoint that reality, let's try to get as fundamental and basic as we can, and just say, if this is the case, then what is the logical conclusion of that? If you want to adopt a worldview where there is just physical matter and energy, let's leave it there. There are atoms form into molecules. There are interactions between them based on how molecules behave. Let's just say that is reality. And everything else about reality is constructed upon that. And therefore, there is no room for a spiritual. There is no room for a mind independent of the physical, because the physical is all there is. Let's try to see if what you just said can stand, if everything in reality is basically constructed on those building blocks. Can there be organisms that care about truth? Can there be organisms that try to survive? Can there be organisms that apparently make decisions? Now remember, all right, so let's try to work with that and see if that worldview can stand, or if there does necessarily have to be another. This is kind of where I want to go right now. We can get to the ethics and external causes and things like that later, but we have to establish whether there has to be something beyond the physical. Is one line of question. Okay, so I've spent enough time setting it up.
Well, let me. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I like the direction this is going, and I think it's clear that this is a conversation we're probably going to have a couple of part 2, part 3, because we are really getting into a lot of really fascinating stuff, and I don't want to just leave a cliffhanger out there because we feel like we're pressed for time. So let's just dig into this as deep as we need to, and then we may have to put a pin in it, and then pick it up again, and as your schedule allows and stuff. I think the audience is engaging with it. It's a fascinating conversation. I do want to clarify one thing really quickly, though. I'm actually a naturalist, not a materialist. Now, we are talking about material things that I agree with you. I agree, absolutely. We're talking about molecules and things of that nature. But my own personal position is not that I'm a physicalist. I'm actually a naturalist. I believe everything has a natural cause, but I don't necessarily think it has to be physical. So one example of that would be mathematics. Not the language of math. We invent that, but what mathematics actually represents. I believe that the universe is essentially built around mathematics and geometric shapes. And this is transcendental and fundamental. So it's not a physical material thing, if that makes sense. So I want to clarify that just so the audience doesn't think that I'm a physicalist specifically. In this conversation, I agree that we're talking about physical things, molecules and things of that nature. And I'm not presupposing spirits or minds or other things like that. But just because I'm not talking about spirits or minds or souls doesn't mean I'm actually a strict materialist. So just for clarification there. So go ahead.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction. I see. The thing is, we don't have a complete understanding of nature. So to say you're the reason I avoid the term naturalism is because it could theoretically include concepts like God, the soul, and an independent mind as well. Just that those things, if those things are true, they are part of nature. Right now, we don't understand that, but that would be subsumed within naturalism. So I think that distinguishing that between naturalism and physicalism is probably a wise thing to do. So yes, we're analyzing the physicalist worldview and asking ourselves, can the physicalist worldview account for all the observations before us? Now, there's no one questioning that there is a physical, well, I guess it's the idealist, but let's just, there's a physical world in front of us. Can the idea that everything is the sum total of everything is atoms and molecules interacting. Can that account for what we observe? That's what we're going for here. And also some of the other things you said about organisms. And so let's dive into this. And yeah, we can have conversation 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. If 2 hours is enough, and then we're going to open up at some point, that's fine. I'll come back another time. We'll pick up where we left off. So there's no time issue here. All right, let's just try to dive into this. Let's think about like a little ant. The ant doesn't want to die. So I guess let's get even simpler. Let's say you have like a little clod of dirt, and naturalism has no supernatural element, of course. But the problem is, like, what is natural? Like, is a soul? If a soul exists, it's part of nature. It's just part of nature we don't observe. Like, a worm can't see the sun. Okay, so it's, it would have a hard time defining what the sun is, but it's still part of nature. Same thing. Humans can't observe the spiritual, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I just want to throw that out there, Chris. Let's say you have a clod of dirt. Now, what's a clod of dirt? A clod of dirt is assembly and is a compilation, an aggregation of atoms into a larger formation that we would recognize from a greater viewpoint as a clod of dirt. Now, let's say there's a rock rolling down a hill into that clod of dirt. Now, the molecules in the clod of dirt, the evolutionary game theory demonstrates that survival is achieved through fitness payoff and not truth. Well, it's not even that.
I think that was actually aimed at me. I probably shouldn't be popping these up on the screen, so I'm not trying to distract you. I think that one was actually aimed more at me because I was talking about how organisms are geared toward truth. And we're definitely going to open up this panel because there's so much great chat going on, and I see people are really interacting with this. So we're already coming up on an hour. In about 15 minutes, we're going to be an hour into it. So in the next 15, 20 minutes, once A's and I can make a little bit of headway here, I'm going to open up the panel and we'll let everybody, because there's so much great interaction here. And I think
let's try to make a little bit of ground on this conversation right here. I know I'm being long-winded, but
no, A's, you're doing a great job. We need to flesh this out. So you're absolutely you're doing a great job. And I apologize. I probably should not be popping up the chat like I was. I just want to
it's fine.
I'm seeing them, I'm recognizing them, and I'm gonna.
Okay, how about this? If you pop something up, I won't interact with it. You can pop it up just to show the audience that you're respecting, looking at their perspective, and that's fine. So I'll just kind of go on. Then you do, that's fine. I'm not criticizing. I'm just okay.
So you've got the rock crashing into the dirt,
right? So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set up basically basically getting into these theoretical brainstorming, whatever you want to call it, that shows that the way you're conceiving of things actually can't work. And I'm trying to build it, but it's hard to do it in a short period of time, because I want to show you that what I'm basically trying to get to is, when you look at a clod of dirt, if you're going to adopt the physical, if somebody, not you, but if somebody is going to adopt a physicalist perspective, what you have to basically, at the end of the day, a clod of dirt has the same essence organismally, if that is a word, as an ant or a bird or a flower or a human being. There's no essential difference between a clod of dirt and a bug when it comes to what they are essentially in terms of their physical building blocks. Now, the reason that we think of bugs differently is because of our experience, but we have to ask ourselves, what is the worldview telling us is the truth? And can that worldview really be seen as valid once we realize the logical conclusions from it? So in the physicalist worldview, there is no essential difference between a mindless clod of dirt and a bug or a bird or a human or anything. And what I'm trying to establish there is that when you examine the functional elements of what makes up those things, a clod of dirt or a bug, the essential elements are the same. A bunch of atoms aggregated into a certain configuration. In the case of the clod of dirt, it's a clod of dirt. In the case of the bug, it's the bug. The question is, can the bug, because it's in the shape of a bug, do anything fundamentally different from the clod of dirt? And from the physicalist perspective, the answer would have to be logically, philosophically, no. But because the fundamental elements of the bug and the clod of dirt are the same, and they have because the chemicals are, the molecules are in the shape of a bug, they don't suddenly gain the ability to care about survival. Okay, that's where I'm trying to go with that.
Okay, I would push back on that because I disagree at a fundamental level. Now, before I get into that, let me address Scott his comment about just real quick here. So let me pull this.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So the evolutionary game theory demonstrates that survival is achieved through fitness, payoff, and not truth. And I would say that that essentially these are the same things. That truth is basically what is the reality. Truth to me and reality are synonymous with each other. So that is basically what truth is. Now, when people use the word truth, they're in sociology, we recognize that there is my truth and your truth and my, blah, 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 blah. But when I'm talking about the truth and saying that organisms have a propensity towards the truth, I'm talking about reality. So maybe truth is a loaded word there because of how it gets used. So maybe I should say that we have a propensity of reality, but I'm interacting with A's in the verbiage that he was using. What do they care about? Right. So I'm thinking care truth. So realities, I would say, simple at the basic level, we organisms function based on reality. And if they didn't, they wouldn't be here. So I think that's self-evident. And that kind of addresses some of what you were talking about, Ace, about why would they do that? How do we know that they're doing that? Well, again, because if they weren't doing that, they wouldn't be here. Because they exist, they must necessarily follow certain actions, right? Which is interacting with their environment in the real way, the real environment in the real way. So this is the big capital T truth that I'm talking about here. Now, I agree with you that with the materialist world, and I'm willing to put on my materialist hat for this part of the conversation, because I actually do support this part of the physical concept that yes, the universe that we're interacting with and observing empirically is going to be based on observable things, and therefore it's going to be energy and matter, right? The stuff that we can actually observe and interact with, that we know we are. And I think when it comes down to the assembly of the molecules, the different types of different types of energy, how it interacts with these molecules has absolute effects that create differences in between the bug, the dirt, the person, and everything else. Think about, like, for example, in the kitchen, you can take the same 3 basic ingredients or 4 basic ingredients like flour, eggs, water, and maybe some yeast or something like that. I'm not a baker, but some hypothetically, let's just say you could take these 4 ingredients, and you could, with those 4 basic ingredients, you could make a number of completely different types of dishes to eat. They would have different taste, they'd have different form, they'd have different quality as far as temperature. Maybe some you could eat it cold, hot, whatever. So just because they share the same core atoms at the atomic level, you got eggs, you got your flour, you got your water, you got your yeast or whatever, doesn't mean you can't have a massive variety in the essence, quote unquote. Because in philosophy, when we talk about essence, this is really what we talk about with form, for example, right? Like Platonic form, essence. So we share the same essence. We share humanness. I have got a car outside and it's got carness, right? So on and so forth. So this is how we independently describe different objects, different things. So I would say that just because it has these building blocks are the same, you could take a bucket full of Legos. And I remember when I was a kid, one of my favorite things to do was play with Legos, and you dump out a big bucket, you'd have 500 or 1,000 or 1,500, whatever, in little blocks of Legos. And you could build skyscrapers, you could build airplanes, you could build boats, you could build freaking people. I mean, you could robots, whatever you wanted, your imagination could do with the same fundamental building blocks. You could make all kinds of different things. So I'm not sure how that creates a problem for the materialist physicalist view.
I'll tell you. Well, that's exactly this is the conversation that I want to have, and I'm trying to I'm saying that's exactly what I want to get to. Now, There's a comment that Chris Moore has put in there. You are confusing organisms with inanimate objects. Well, thank you for highlighting that. What I want Chris to understand is that according to the physicalist/materialist, I think those terms are more or less synonymous. Organisms
I agree.
are.
Yeah, physicalist and materialist are absolutely, yeah.
Okay. But they are not the same as naturalists.
No, correct.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that. According to the physicalist paradigm, organisms are actually inanimate objects. It's because there can be no distinction, because it's basically all the same underlying causal phenomenon resulting in differently shaped aggregates of material. So when let's say, you have the Big Bang. Let's go back to the Big Bang. The Big Bang explodes. Let's just assume no questions about the Big Bang. And let's just say it happened. It has all the matter. It explodes outward. It expands outward, however you want to call it. And the matter is forming, the stellar nucleosynthesis, all of this. The matter is forming the atoms, the molecules, the chemistry. It's all going out there. And you wait 14 billion years, and then you freeze it, and you have a snapshot. What happened in that time frame is basically the same fundamental forces of nature resulted in a bunch of different amalgamations of shapes of objects in the universe. Some of them took the shape of a rock. Some of them took the shape of a star. Some of them took the shape of a bug. Some of them took the shape of a human. But it was all the same underlying, according to this worldview, for the fundamental forces of nature: electromagnetism, gravity, the nuclear forces. There was no mind guiding the process at any point. Either a transcendental mind, such as that of a god, or an individual mind, say an independently existing mind of an entity or a being within the universe. It was all matter and molecules. So what that means is that everything in the universe shares the same essence. So to make, Chris Moore, a distinction between organisms and inanimate objects is to defy the logic and the philosophy of the materialist worldview. I don't know if you are a materialist, but we're examining the materialist worldview in light of free will and agency. And what I'm trying to get you to understand philosophically is that in the materialist worldview, there is no essential distinction between inanimate objects and organisms. And that leads into the problem of why agency within organisms doesn't work in the materialist worldview. So that's what I'm trying to build to help you understand. You don't understand. And again, this is going to come across as disrespectful, but for you to make that distinction shows you don't understand the logical ends of what it is that these people believe. Okay. So in the materialist worldview, a bug was created by over time, at the end of the day, you could say it was evolution, whatever, but what it is just basically matter blowing around in space for billions of years. And at the end of that process, which is obviously in the end because it's going to, but at a certain point in time, when you take a picture of the universe and freeze it and examine its different parts, you will find that some atoms aggregated into the shape of a bug. Some of them aggregated in the shape of clods of dirt. Some of them form puddles of mud. But none of it's essentially different from any other part. The reason that this is absurd is because we know that's not the case. We can see that there's a fundamental essential difference between living things and non-living things. But according to this is why the physicalist worldview is actually counterintuitive, because we know that there's organisms and there's inanimate objects and there's a chasm between them that can't be bridged. And the chasm is observed in their activities. A clod of dirt can't. Let's go back to the clod of dirt with a giant rock rolling down a hill. The clod of dirt is just a clod of dirt. If it sees a rock coming towards it, it's not going to be like, oh no, I need to survive. I'm going to jump to the side and get out of the path of this rock. No, the clod of dirt's going to sit there. And it's going to, even if it sees the rock from a mile away, it's going to sit there and let that seize, quote unquote. The clod of dirt's going to let that rock run right over top of it. But it's not going to try to survive. Let's say you have a bug, a smart bug, that and I'm going to end here in a second. I heard a chime there. Let me just land this plane real fast. Let's say you have a bug, not a clod of dirt. Maybe not a bug. Let's say like a bird. Let's say a bird, slightly smarter, can see the rock, has intentionality, has feelings, cares about surviving because it's not just a clump of atoms. Guess what the bird's going to do? What we observe. The bird's going to look at it. It's going to make a decision to defy what the laws of physics have, say, inertia. An object in motion will stay at rest. If that bird doesn't decide to fly away, guess what? The rock's going to hit it too and run over to it. The bird has to make a decision with a mind to get out of the way. So this is how we know the materialist worldview can't explain everything that we observe.
That is interesting. I don't see for me myself, and an object in motion wants to stay in motion, not stay at rest. I think that's what you're.
An object at rest will stay at rest unless
right. Exactly.
I definitely misspoke at some point.
Yeah. Okay. Just making sure. I'm pretty sure we're on the same page, but I just want to clear that up. And for people from your channel, I don't know if Dirty Varmint has come over from your channel or not, but I know this is one of his great misunderstandings about the laws of motion. So I just really quick to clear that up. That's all relative. So nothing is actually at rest. Everything in the universe is moving. So when they say when we're talking about at rest, we're talking about at rest relative to another object. But there's nothing, technically speaking, in the entire universe that's actually at rest. So for the physicist nerds out there, we're clear on that. As far as again, I don't see a problem because we can empirically look at the structure, at the makeup, at the building blocks that we're talking about here. Between the rock, the clod of dirt, the bug, the bird, we can look at all these different things and examine the different building blocks and the way they're assembled. And the assembly process makes a huge difference. I mean, we can do this with airplanes. I build boats, right? I need to build boats. To be licensed by the U.S. Coast Guard, you get issued what's called a hull identification number, and the same thing you have in your car. Except it's called a vehicle identification number. Okay, so that means you're legally licensed to produce this product in the United States of America. And my boats use the same exact materials that your car is made up of. All right, I could use the same exact building blocks, but I can make a fundamentally different structure with it. An essence, the essence of it all is going to be based on the form, right? The essence of the boat gives it boatness. That's philosophy right there. And the essence you're talking about isn't the molecules they're talking about. They're talking about what is the form of the thing makes it the essence. So like I said, there's boatness, there's carness, there's humanness. And so you're pulling essence into the building blocks, but the building blocks themselves at the fundamental level are just like the bucket of Legos. It's just all out there as they assemble. So the question is, what's causing them to assemble the different ways? I think is where we would want to have this conversation about the mind. I don't think the fact that everything has the same ultimately physical building blocks of molecules and atoms causes any problems with the materialist worldview. I don't see that as being an issue. I think where we might have the discussion is what causes them to form in different ways. But I think there's a natural explanation for that, and it's the laws of physics and evolution for biology and things of that nature address those issues. But I don't see any problem with the fact that everything comes down to matter. We just put it that way, right? Physical matter and energy at the end of the day. And we have, like you said, we have the four types. We have the strong and weak nuclear forces, electromagnetic energy, gravity, so on and so forth. So we understand at the fundamental level what these even mean. But the variety and the way these things ultimately get assembled and how that then interacts with the other things that are being assembled, which makes the world what it is, I personally don't see a problem with that from a naturalistic worldview. And because we're talking about the empirical side of the natural worldview, I don't see how that creates any obstacles personally. So I'm trying to put myself in your shoes here. So let me see if I can come up.
Let me try to explain why it does. You remember?
Okay.
Let me first of all, when you start talking about Platonic forms, I just want to quickly discuss this. The essences or the forms themselves are different from the essence. So you could have different forms that have the same underlying essence, or you could have if you take Aristotle was Plato's student. Okay, and Aristotle, vehemently disagreed with his mentor Plato that there were these things that were called Platonic forms, and that there's this thing called carness or tableness or boatness. There aren't these transcendental categories that arise as a result of the configurations in which matter is presented to us. Like if a bunch of atoms form into the shape of a boat, there doesn't become this thing called boatness that kind of encompasses all things that are boats. These are mental abstractions. Again, you have to have a mind to have a concept that categorizes things like this. Outside of a mind, an independent mind, all you have is the amalgamations and aggregations of matter itself. So we can talk about that later if we want. But remember when I went back to the question is why is there a problem for the materialist worldview in terms of what we observe? Here's the problem. Remember way back in the beginning when I talked about choosing breakfast or lunch or whatever it is. You have an apple in front of you and you have an orange in front of you. And I said if free will does exist, then at that moment in time, you really can choose either the apple or the orange. It's not determined. And what does happen is based on what you decide based on your autonomous agency. But if the materialist worldview is correct, then it is impossible to choose both, to have a real option of choosing both, because of the laws of physics will determine the course of the molecules in your body. So the laws of physics aren't going to change at a moment in time based on how something feels. The law of gravity, let's say you have a ball or a raindrop falling down through the sky. The law of gravity is not going to suddenly be like, I'd like to land over there. I'm going to suspend the law of gravity and let this water drop, or like the electromagnetism. Let's take a magnet. The magnet is going to draw whatever it is at a certain force, depending on how far the object is, regardless of what the object is thinking. Obviously, they can't think, but point is, the atoms are going to take the course they're going to take. They're not going to, be like, oh, I need to go over there. I need to choose the apple because that's better for me. No, when you start looking at the fact that let's just take one atom. Let's try to simplify it to just one atom moving through space based on the laws of physics. If you were to simplify it to that universe, the atom is going to go in one direction, it's going to do whatever it is. If you know the initial conditions and the forces acting upon the atom, you can plot its course through the universe for all eternity, literally, if you had a powerful enough computer to do so. Now, that doesn't change when you have two atoms. Let's add another atom to our universe, and they interact with one another. If you know the properties of the atoms and how they interact, how they're based on the laws of physics, you can predict what they're going to do from the start of the quote universe until all of eternity, based on the mathematics of how all of the laws of the nature of that universe operate. Now, let's say you add a cajillion atoms. And, it's not a real number, but let's say you have a universe like our own with a cajillion atoms. If you had a powerful enough computer and everything operated based on the laws of physics, just like in the universe with two atoms, you could actually calculate the entire course of the universe through all eternity based on the determined mathematics of the laws of nature. There is no room for a shape of atom, a bunch of atoms in the shape of a human, to arrive at a point in time where there's an apple and an orange in front of you, and you say, yeah, that being could either go for the apple or the orange. No. The course of the atoms through space, through time, was always determined from the moment of the inception of the universe. So there's only going to be one logical theoretical path they could take. So if someone is going to sit there and say that a human being at a moment in time can choose between this option A or that option B, and also be a materialist, it is logically impossible for that position to be taken.
I think that if we take, let's take twins for example. Let's hypothetically speaking, we have two biological twins that are born at the exact same time, and they're identical twins, right? Identical in every way. If they were both standing in front of the apple and the orange, I still think it's possible, given the deterministic view, that they would each make a different decision, because the way that the outside environment affects us, right? Because of reason, the way that we reason through things, the thought processes, the emotions, and things of this nature, actually do affect our decision-making processes. So every action that we perform is always motivated. I don't think there's any such thing as a unmotivated action. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, we always have a reason, a motivation
right.
for what we
always
do.
some kind of motivation, whether it's physical or mental or whatever. There's no such thing. It seems to me to be logically impossible that there's an unmotivated action. Now, we have autonomous bodily functions. That's not what I'm talking about, right? Like breathing, digestive system. There are autonomous body functions. I'm talking about actions, right? Our actions are always going to be motivated. So then it comes down to what motivates an individual. And this is where I think the important part of the conversation, when we eventually get into things like ethics and stuff in this, which we're not going to get to today because we're already we got 45 minutes left. And I want to open up this, but it comes down to motivations, and how we become motivated to do something is heavily, if not entirely, influenced by previous experiences and how we are reasoning through things and emotions. And subconsciously, this all gets tied together before we actually, act. And so this action, I believe the will behind this action is illusionary. We think that we're making this action. Let me give one final point to my argument here, and then let's open up the panel. Are you okay with that? And of course, you can.
Yeah, I would like to make a closing statement as well.
Yeah. Go ahead. Make yours. You started us off, so you make your closing statement. Then I'll make my final thing, and then we're still going to be here talking, so we can chew on all this. And I'm going to pin the link and get people loaded up here if anybody wants to join. So go ahead, Ace. Let me let me do it like this. Okay, you've got the floor, brother.
Yeah. First of all, I'm enjoying the discussion. It's not over yet. But I'll just say that, and I agree that there probably would be very useful to have another round 2, 3, 4, however many it takes. But let me just quickly, because time is limited. When you start getting into motivations and environmental circumstances and environmental causes and the alcoholic father and the twins and all that, you've actually progressed beyond a really essential point that you need to establish. You need to establish that people can actually have the capacity to even influence at all their course of action. And what I've been trying to establish, probably not very well, doing very well. And this conversation can continue in the future, and I can come back and try to make my arguments clearer. Is that go back to the example of someone standing between option A and option B. Free will requires that at that moment in time, you actually can choose between option A and option B. But if you have a materialistic viewpoint, understanding, or belief about reality, then you cannot get to a point where a person can logically choose between option A and B, which basically invalidates and just destroys the entire notion of what it means to be a human. And I think it contradicts what we clearly observe and how we operate, which is that humans can make choices, and that humans do have the ability to, in some way, determine the course of their destiny, choosing one way or the other. The future is indeterminate. So there needs to be another future conversation about why I believe it's impossible for the materialist worldview to be true and humans to be able to make rational decisions and choices. So we'll just have to leave it there for now, but because you can't have motivations without having the ability to choose based on your motivations, okay? Or motivations is a meaningless term. I'll put it that way. Motivations become meaningless if everything is determined by the laws of physics. Well, our motivations are part of our mind. Our mind is determined by the laws of physics. Our mind is determined by laws of chemistry. So our motivations are what our chemistry in our brain produces. It's all circular. So to say we have motivations and then to say our motivations are caused by chemistry, well, it's all just chemistry. It's all just determined physical laws of nature playing out on physical matter, and none of it is meaningful because it's all just a bunch of atoms moving around in space. So we need to continue this conversation, and we will, and hopefully in the group discussion, but also in future conversations. All right, I'll end it there.
Okay, let me see here. Okay, so pull this down. All right, I was going to make a closing argument, but I've got so distracted trying to get the link posted and get Scott pulled in here and also make a comment on the thing that I kind of forgot the specific way I wanted to articulate my point. So hopefully I'll remember during this conversation here, but I'll put a pin in my own closing statement. And then let me go ahead and let's turn the floor over to Scott. Scott, you can introduce yourself. And then, of course, whatever questions you have. Definitely take advantage, you guys, of having A's here. His time is limited, and I can answer your questions at any time. I'm happy to answer whatever now too, but just keep that in mind that if you have something for both of us, ask A's first because his time is going to be more limited. So go ahead, Scott. I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Muted, Scott. You're muted. You're muted, Scott.
There we go. There we go. Can we hear? Are we good?
Yeah, you're going to have to say all that over again. I'm curious.
That's good. I was just going to say, nice to talk to you again, A. And nice to see Objective Ethics. Great conversation. To some extent, I agree with both of you guys. Of course, you may know I am a non-dualist, so I sort of agree with both sides. So I feel like consciousness is a thing. Humans are conscious. The things we observe, like rocks and dirt and atoms, and are probably not what we would consider conscious, at least in the way that humans are conscious. So there's something special about, biological life, like human beings, for example, right? So we've already got two things going on right there, two concepts. However, I feel that consciousness or our experience is obviously constrained by the what we call the physical world, because we all know that we hurt ourselves, we get hungry, we get sleepy, we're mortal, we're not immortal people, so we're susceptible to the physical world, right? So consciousness, though, I would say, is kind of a special irreducible property. So in that way, I sort of agree with A's philosophy here, because when we think of fundamental properties, what do we mean by fundamental properties? We mean something that's not reducible to more basic entities, right? We can't connect them. Say, like in science, we talk about mass, electric charge, spin, space-time, quantum fields, what have you. Those are considered fundamental properties. Consciousness, as far as we know, they're working on it, but so far we don't have an answer, is not reducible necessarily to any other properties other than that. Even though there are correlations, there are constraints with the physical body, for example, the mind-body problem. But, we can compare consciousness to these fundamental properties, like, public versus private. Mass and charge are publicly measurable. Consciousness is privately experienced. Physical properties are mathematically describable. Conscious experience, like qualia, is not mathematically captured, right? We infer math through measurement, which is done through consciousness. We know consciousness only directly through first person awareness. And so that's as far as we can go. We know we're conscious because we're having an experience. I think, therefore I am. So there's a difference there. So I sort of agree with A that, and this is how we get I'm a compatibilist. So when it comes to free will, the only reason we have any measure of free will is because of this quality we have as human beings called consciousness. That's the anchor of free will but it is constrained. Like I said, It's constrained by the physical world. And for me, that's kind of obvious, but I'll leave it there.
Go ahead, Ace. I'll give you a chance to respond to that.
Yeah. For me, compatibilism, well, there's a lot you said there. And okay, so I do agree with you that consciousness cannot be explained purely in terms of what materialists say the universe is composed of. For consciousness to exist and mental activity, there must necessarily be something in addition to matter and energy. It's not sufficient. And I've tried to explain that's been we almost didn't even discuss free will. We almost just tried to answer that question. And this is in an hour and 15 minutes, we hardly got anywhere. But I'll be back. So compatibilism. Compatibilism to me is a code. There is no, depending on how you define it, I don't believe in compatibilism because either everything's determined or it isn't. Okay, if once we get past, so the future in a materialist, physicalist worldview, everything is determined. The future is determined out into infinity based on the laws of nature and how molecules are going to behave based on those laws. For there to be any indeterminacy, the materialist worldview collapses. So that's where I'm trying to go.
I have a question. So do you feel that your mind is constrained in some way at all? Like, is your thinking part of a causal chain?
The mind is conditioned. See, a lot of actually, believe it or not, a lot of what religion is, and this is going pretty deep. Religion is an attempt to recondition your mind, not based on what the world viewpoint, but upon the idea that there is a spiritual to be considered. Or what I'm trying to say is, yes, when we are raised, our mind is conditioned to operate, and our mind contains our beliefs. So you could almost think of our mind as almost like a body that contains thoughts, beliefs, memories. It's its own entity. It's not like a physical body that has like a shape or anything, but it is a real thing that influences our physical body, almost like our body is a puppet controlled by the realer aspect of ourselves, which is our mind, which is imperceptible. But while we're being raised, our mind is being impressed by our environment, and it becomes conditioned to think or believe a certain way. Now, a lot of growing as a human being is reconditioning ourselves away from what we've been taught if it's wrong, changing our mind. This is what metanoia means, repent in Christianity. Metanoia, meta change, mind is noia. Changing our mind to believe the truth. So I'll leave it there. I've spoken enough.
Yeah, just let Chris jump in here in case he has any questions for you, A's or whatever. Just keep the conversation flowing, and then we'll let you guys all just go back and forth with each other. I just want to take advantage of the fact that you're here now, and I agree, brother. We are definitely going to have to do a part 2, 3, whenever it takes, because when it comes to this conversation, Chris, give me just 1 second. I'll tune in here. But when it comes to the conversation, there are, as I mentioned at the outset, it really, now we have to figure out the mind-body problem, which is what we're trying to sort out right now. We've got to discuss ethics and justice. That's another big issue here. How do we deal with things? We also need to discuss education. How are we going to educate people in what they ought to do and ought not to do, and just what's good for them, what's healthy, what's the correct way to live your life, the most beneficial way to live your life. So there's so many things that are tied to this conversation. An hour and 15 minutes, we just barely scratching the surface. So go ahead, Chris.
Okay. First of all, I just want to go back a little bit on your argument against physicalism not computing a bit, just so basically because we're kind of going a little bit on yonder, and what I have to say is kind of not exactly to challenge that, but just to let you know that they're not mutually exclusive.
Go ahead.
In physicalism, or at least how I kind of see it, it does, it can't, well, not saying that it can be compatible, but it still computes, because if you go by the perspective that consciousness is a byproduct of, well, you can say either like evolution or just because of the fact that we are essentially organic beings that essentially changed over time to allocate resources, as in computing power and problem solving, and then also jumping ahead into the cooperation as a species, as a survival tactic, and so on and so forth. Like, there's no, how I see it is that there's no, there's no, like, those two can still exist.
I don't believe they can. So what you're trying to say is materialism can be true, and the idea that we have a consciousness which is able to affect the course of reality. Those two ideas are not mutually exclusive. Is that what you're trying to argue?
As far as I think I can, yes, but it's through the lens of that the fact that consciousness is a byproduct of
Okay.
it's a byproduct of
Okay.
of other things.
Okay, so what you're trying to say is that consciousness is produced by the activity in our brain. All right, so I think that's just, you can say it's a byproduct. It's okay. It's a product of chemical activity in our brain.
Yes.
Okay, what does it have
But-
physical? Does it have a physical element to it? Does it have how? Okay, so the molecules in our brain are interacting with one another, and they're producing consciousness. So, what does it mean that that our brain molecules are producing consciousness? What is the consciousness fundamentally made of? Is it a physical element, or is it something else? What is it exactly?
Well, the underpinning need of survival.
What is the fundamental? So let's talk about the atom. The fundamental building block of physical things is the atom. Now, I know there's subatomic particles. Let's just ignore that. Let's just stick with the atom. The fundamental building block of physical things is the atom. What is the fundamental physical building block of consciousness?
Neurons in the brain?
No. Those neurons in the brain are made of atoms. Are you saying that? Okay. So what does okay, let's go this way. Neurons in the brain. Are neurons in the brain conscious?
Not by themselves, no, but as a collective.
As a collective. So they get together and then they form a collective consciousness. How do they do this? What is the physical law of nature that says when a bunch of basically atoms in the shape of neurons get together, they can then collectively have a mind that they share between themselves, which perceives things. So the neurons by themselves are not conscious, but when they get together and they're close to one another in the shape of a brain, then they form a collective consciousness made of what exactly? These are the questions you have to answer.
I'm not exactly sure where you're going with this.
You said this is what I'm trying to get you to figure out. You said that consciousness is a product of brain chemistry.
Yeah.
Okay. What is our brain chemistry actually producing? If everything is physical or material, what is the material basic component of consciousness that is being produced? What does it look like? What is it? How can we observe it? How can we measure it? Go.
Neural activity.
Neural activity.
And neural activity in form of whatever you want to say, electricity or whatever.
Electricity.
Yeah.
What is electricity?
Okay. You're okay.
Let me help you. Electricity is the flow of electrons from one place to another.
Yes.
So are you saying that's what consciousness is? It's the flowing of electrons from one place to another.
Yes.
There's an electrochemical process that happens inside the brain. It's so
Okay. So when you turn on a light in your room, electrons flow in a circuit around your room and a light bulb comes on. Is the light bulb conscious?
No, because it's an
Okay,
inanimate
hold on.
object.
Well, wait a minute. You just said that consciousness is the flow of atoms or electrons. You said it's electricity. So why are electrons?
Okay, so let me just say.
Let me ask the question. Sorry, I'm not trying to be rude, but I want to ask this question. Why we're talking about the laws of nature? The laws of nature dictate, according to your worldview, that when electrons flow from one place to another, consciousness is produced, but only in brains, not in the light bulb. How does that? How does the laws of your worldview, the laws of nature in your worldview, suspended for the light bulb example, but not in the brain?
Well, in inanimate objects, it goes on the form of chemical reactions, as in oxygen, hydrogen equals water, and so on and so forth. So,
Chris, let's back up. I asked you, what is the fundamental building block of consciousness? You said electricity. We defined electricity as the flow of electrons from one place to another. Okay, well, electrons flow from one place to another in way more places than just the human brain. So if you're going to say that electrons flowing from one place to another in light bulbs doesn't produce consciousness, then electrons flowing from one place to another is not the fundamental building block of consciousness.
well, I
It's
think
Yes.
if I could jump in here real quick, because I think to expand on what Chris is saying, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think what I'm understanding for what you're saying is that basically there's a neural network inside of a brain that's not inside of a light bulb. There's a fundamental
Yes.
difference here between a
It's
light bulb and
basically-
a brain.
sorry if I'm kind of cutting you off. It's basically there's two different sandboxes when you're referring to electricity on a light bulb and extra electricity in a brain. Same thing with a rock and basically, what I'm saying is that quote unquote organisms and inanimate objects are two different things. Not sure if
you can listen. You have to. We're talking about essential building blocks. We're talking about the question of, can consciousness exist in a materialist worldview paradigm? For that to happen, consciousness has to be explicable in terms of material.
I think to get to the root of this, what we should do is come up with a definition of what consciousness actually is.
That's what I'm trying. Yeah, right. Okay, so consciousness obviously is being aware of reality around us. It's having mental experiences. It's having thoughts. It's basically the ability to perceive and be aware. Okay.
So when you say thoughts, I really want to hammer down on this because this is actually really important. Scott brought up consciousness as being fundamental, and I think it ties into this. If we're gonna have the discussion of consciousness at all, we should really figure out what we're talking about, because depending on how you define consciousness, there's studies that have been done. In fact, Scott knows a lot more about this than I do, but I've seen some of this stuff as well, that there are studies being done that even simple organisms are conscious. So it depends on how you're talking about consciousness. It's really important, because I know it might seem, we could just say at a basic level, when you said you're experiencing things or you're reacting to your environment. Well, who knows, what does that mean? Reacting to your environment? Simple organisms react to their environment. So consciousness, you said thoughts, we have thoughts. Are you talking about you have to have abstract thoughts? Because that takes all the animals off the table except for human beings at that point. So what do we really try to get as specific as possible, just so we can have a fluid conversation about this? Because computers can process what we would attribute to everything you've said at some point, right? So until you start getting to the abstract part of it, right? So how do computers pop up images on our screen, you know what I mean, all through material components? So what do we really?
Well, that's a really good. See, often skeptics will try to point to like supercomputers as things that are fundamentally rudiments. And I know Scott is probably. I don't want to. I don't want to just be the only one talking. So
And
I can
I don't want you to
offer-
feel, I don't want you to feel attacked either, because I just want people to take advantage of you being here, but I didn't mean to like everybody pile on A's, you know. So.
That's not
Yeah.
happening.
I'm not trying to actually. It's just
No. This is part of why I want to come on to answer people who disagree with me. So there's nothing wrong with people questioning and challenging my assertions. That's the whole point of this. So I appreciate Chris being here and offering the challenge, and same with Scott if he is challenging me. But I guess you know.
Can I offer a definition
Go ahead,
that
go
I
ahead.
think you would agree with?
Go ahead.
Experience, having an experience.
Yeah. I would say at a basic level, to be conscious means to be aware, and to it's the same word, to have an experience, and to have to basically to actually be able to perceive in a real
It's
world way.
qualitative. This is important for you to. This is very important for you to really lay out, because what you're really saying is that you're differentiating between matter and consciousness. What really does the trick here is when you say awareness, you're talking about quality. When we measure matter, that's a quantity. So we're talking about structures and descriptions and equations, and you can describe matter. But consciousness is different. It's first person quality. It's what it's like to experience or be aware of something. So they're two totally different things. So in all due respect, this is not meant as a derogatory thing, but under the definition of magical thinking, to say that say rabbits come from hats, not just I don't mean like the parlor trick, to say that literally rabbits coming from hats would be something coming from nothing. That would be literal magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to say something like quality comes from non-quality, that would be magical thinking in the same way. So for me, on my view, I see emergence, like this whole thing about, it produces consciousness, or consciousness just comes out of the matter somehow at some point of complexity or something like that, is similar to rabbits coming out of hats, because there's no hatness in rabbits and no rabbitness in hats. Likewise, there's no what it's like by definition with matter. That's the whole point. That's when people say matter, when physicalists or materialists go on about how, oh, there's nothing to the universe, it's all just dumb matter, it's just matter and energy, molecules. And what they're telling you is there's no such thing as quality, except when it comes to human beings, perhaps. Or some even will say, some of them have run up against the hard problem of consciousness, and they go ahead and say, well, actually, consciousness, you're right, consciousness can't exist. So they'll say consciousness is an illusion. And so there'll be like this whole cancel conscious movement, right? And so what they're doing is they're saying that consciousness doesn't exist. There's no what it's like. There is no quality to existence. There's just existence. There's just matter and motion. But I deny that, because I know firsthand what it's like to be me, to taste an orange, to taste chocolate, to hear a sound. So I know firsthand that that's false. You have to be conscious to even have an illusion. So there's a difference between quality and quantity. And I think that's what you probably need to focus on. Just my opinion.
Okay. I'm not sure if I kind of piggybacking on Scott's argument, but like from my perspective, that's how I see things, is that I have no problem being essentially being a fungus or a bacterium on a rock, essentially within the confines of a solar system, in the confines of a galaxy, in the confines of a universe. So I don't really like that. That's what I'm basically coming at.
So you're suspicious. You're kind of
Sorry?
suspicious of the specialness of saying that we can be conscious as opposed to every other thing in the universe. That seems kind of anthropocentric.
Well, that I'm not saying that we are special, but it's just
No, I'm saying you're saying we're not special.
yeah, pretty
What your
much.
point is that what A is saying is he's arguing for, you know, something extra, like this consciousness soul thing, the spirit thing, which
Yeah,
makes us special. And you're
yeah,
kind of suspicious of that.
pretty much. And I'm pretty suspicious to say that we are the only quote unquote sentient being of
I
that
agree.
same place in the space of time, meaning that we are not the first one and we're not the last, but it's also we can be the last, we can be the only ones in the universe, say, but we cannot say that we are the only finite exception to the rest of throughout the infinite expanse of time and space. And yeah,
Well,
sorry, I
I
don't
would
know.
agree. I think consciousness is on a spectrum, in my
Yeah,
opinion. I think it's possible, plausible. There's no contradiction with that. Of course, I don't know what it's like to be a bug or a bee or
I don't
a
know.
bird, or I don't know what it's. I don't even know if they have that. I couldn't say that for sure. I don't even know if you're conscious. Technically,
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
assume you are. But I know I'm conscious. That's really the only thing I know. But either way, I'm not sure how that defeats A's philosophy, because I think what he's saying is that reality that there is subjectivity sort of gives license to something like free will and agency.
yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
the again, remember the topic tonight is free will, but this is what we're getting into an understanding that how you view this topic is so much determined, if I can use that, based on your presuppositions about the fundamental nature of reality and what it is to be a human being, and what is are human beings just physical matter, not just humans, but all of the universe, or is there another element to our being, such as a soul, a mind, a spirit, a consciousness? These are questions, they all tie together. And this free will question has a bunch of puzzle pieces. And the puzzle piece I'm trying to bring in tonight is the idea of the materialist worldview is insufficient to basically create a model that explains what we observe in terms of consciousness, even though we don't understand what consciousness is. It cannot account for the observations. And what you said, Scott, I so resonate with the idea of when, and again, I'm not trying to attack Chris, but when people like Chris say that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon of the brain, or the brain chemistry produces consciousness. Okay, that's language. Imagine trying to be an engineer and saying, well, what produces the Empire State Building? Well, it's a byproduct of people working. Okay, well, you can't, basically, as someone who has something of an engineering background, these things actually have to have nuts and bolts to them. And you can't just use language to say this produces this. There has to be a law of nature, which is the explication, that is the word, of why when atoms in a brain interact, they produce something called consciousness. And in the physicalist worldview, remember, everything's physical. So consciousness has to be physical too.
Yeah,
So
but going back to the Empire State Building thing, well, I don't know what if you want to say example or whatever. Yes, it is a byproduct of human beings, nuts and bolts, and even steel and all that. Yeah, but
what I'm trying to say is that you want to use language to basically put a stamp on the explanation. Say Well, what is consciousness? Or how is consciousness produced? It's produced by brain chemistry. Okay, that actually doesn't answer. Those are just words. So when we try to explain something, let's take a molecular interaction. What we need is what are the fundamental elements involved? So the atoms. What are their properties? Okay, what are the properties of, let's say, water molecule? You have hydrogen and 2 oxygens. Why does a hydrogen bond with 2 oxygens? Well, it has to do with the valence electrons and things like that. We can actually explain it using our knowledge of how these things are constructed. So the fundamental building. Let me try to finish real fast because I'm running short on time.
Okay.
The fundamental building block of water is an H2O molecule, and we understand why it does what it does based on the properties of the water molecule and its constituent elements. You have provided nothing similar or analogous for what you believe is consciousness. We already investigated flow of electrons. When you say consciousness is produced by brain chemistry, what does that actually mean in terms of physicalist, materialist components?
As in to give you a specific thought, a specific thing. That's way over above my pay grade, as I could see. But the thing is that I know that there are specific parts of the brain that are allocated for motor skills. Like your motor, like how you to move and all that stuff. And then there is a place for your thinking and deep thoughts, abstract thoughts, and all that stuff. And then there's basically your unconscious functions, so on and so forth. So
Aaron Raw, there's a saying that he has that I really like. Aaron Raw says, if you can't show it, you don't know it. Therefore, it's just a belief. So if you can say, I don't know how physical matter turns into an experience, I just know it does. You're really just saying what you believe. And that's fine. Like, I consider emergentism magical thinking, but I'm also prepared to live in a magical universe. Like, if that's the case, that's the case. But until it's shown how physical matter can turn into an experience, then it's just a belief. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, it's not scientific. It amounts to another religion that's not based on anything. See, this is the problem. If people want to admit that their beliefs aren't based on science and observations, that's fine. But I guess what I would go to is you've just created another religion that is another faith-based religion. They can call it a scientific faith or a different faith from the religions that have been established. But Scott's right. You haven't actually, nothing you say is based on anything that can be said is rational or based on empirical evidence, which, how is that?
There are, although the thing is, there are empirical effects, though.
Yeah, but how do you explain them? So again, we're going to, like everyone here, this is what Scott was talking about. That there are people who are when these philosophers, when they get into these discussions about consciousness, and they are committed materialists. At the end of the day, they realize there's no materialistic explanation for consciousness, so they end up denying consciousness, which is the very basis of what we are experiencing as we are alive. So they end up denying the very thing we can all agree is actually real. They are flipping themselves upside down because they are committed to materialism, as opposed. This is what I'm trying to get to is, to come to these positions, you actually have to deny what we observe, which is contrary to what the skeptics say, which is they just want to believe what's true. They want to believe what's observable, what we can prove. We all agree we have consciousness. And they want to say but when you talk about the logical ends of the materialist worldview, what they end up having to do is, okay, well, there's just no such thing as consciousness. It doesn't exist. It's like, what? this is where we have to go.
Let me just really quickly here. I want to. We've only got a few minutes. We've got about 10 minutes left before Ace has to leave. I'd like to make a couple closing remarks, and I'd like Ace to be able to hear them so that when he returns, we have kind of a starting off point. So we're going to put a pin in that. So before I do that, and then I also want to give Ace a chance to basically have a final closing remarks, introduce his channel, talk about whatever he thinks about, whatever. Just give him a chance to step out, but say something before he does. And Dr. Dan Norton has joined us, and he talks about free will quite a bit from Ayn Rand's perspective. I don't know how much of the show you've caught, Dr. Norton, or do you want to speak to Ace while he's still here? Because I should turn the floor over to you because Ace is getting ready to leave, or do you want to just join the conversation organically? How do you want to do that?
The only part I heard was the opening statements, and then I just skipped forward to the end right now. So
You missed a lot.
There's quite a bit. We're quite a bit into it. So okay, then in that case, why don't you hold tight, and then let me go ahead and just give a little bit of pushback on what's being said here from the consciousness standpoint, and also just kind of give a couple closing remarks for you to chew on, Ace, and then you and I will reach out to each other via email and set up a part 2 of this. What I'd like to do, just to push back on the consciousness thing, one, I don't think that we really came to a definition of what we're talking about. We threw a lot of ideas out there about what consciousness is, but I didn't actually hear anybody, like I didn't hear you guys come to an agreement of, oh yeah, that's what consciousness is. You know, is it abstraction? Is it self-reflection? Is it like Scott was talking about the qualia? Excuse me, I have to clear my throat. Is it the qualia? You know, what does it feel like to sit next to a warm fire? What's the redness of red? This kind of thing. Is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about being able to interact with our environment at the fundamental level? So I never did hear that parsed out. I'm not sure if you guys did that and I missed it, but I think that was actually really important. So next time, maybe we'll have to get into what we're really talking about here and all come to some kind of agreement on it, because otherwise I do feel like to a certain degree, we might be talking past each other. The other thing I'd like to say is that I feel like we're conflating things a little bit, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful or dismissive, but I've been trying to really follow everybody's talking points. And I feel like, you know, the analogy of the light bulb to the brain, the way the neuron network is set up with the brain, and try to extrapolate that to a light bulb analogy. I don't think that's really a fair analogy. I think if we're going to be more analogous, we would look at something like a computer or something. I was trying to kind of mention that. And the other problem we're going to have here is that no matter what analogy we come up with, the whole thing about an analogous relationship is you're not talking about the thing you're talking about, right? Otherwise it would be that thing. So no analogy is really going to be perfect. So we should try to find the closest analogous relationship that we can, just for fairness sake, in my opinion, and not throw, you know, the light bulb out. I think that's almost kind of a straw man argument. You know, let's tie it together. Straw man might not be fair, but it seems like we could come up with a lot better analogies to the neural network of the brain, as opposed to, you know, comparing that to a light bulb. The other thing I'd like to say, so that might help with some of the talking past each other if we had a better analogy. The other thing I'd like to mention here for you to think about for our next conversation is a couple things. Well, just to tie on the conversation thing, as far as consciousness being emergent, I think a little bit of what Chris was talking about here, if I understood him correctly, and I'm in agreement with him, is that we do have empirical studies on that affect consciousness, and we do this by affecting the brain. We've never seen consciousness arrive, and again, I'm using my definition of consciousness, and I'm assuming what you guys are meaning by consciousness, but we haven't really defined that. So take that for granted. But if I think we're all talking about some similarities, we can affect consciousness by affecting the brain. We don't see rocks acting conscious. We don't see inanimate objects displaying any kind of consciousness, but we can affect consciousness in any animal that has a fairly developed brain, right? But it takes a brain to affect consciousness, unless we're talking about simply reacting with the environment. Then we have to really step back from the conversation and really think about what are we talking about with this consciousness thing? But we don't get abstraction. We don't get what it's like or experience or any of that stuff that ties into that at the most rudimentary level. I would say that one of the questions I had for you specifically more about that ties into free will itself is, do you, and you might be able to answer it now or you might think about it for later, but do you think that it's possible for us to decide what we are convinced by? because I come from the position that we cannot make the decision as to what we find convincing. What decision-making process we have is what information we allow ourselves to be exposed to with what is reasonable. Like I can choose to tune out my wife, but it's not going to be a good idea if I want to have a functional relationship with her, right? So we could decide to a certain degree, like what information we're going to expose ourselves to. If a person who denies a particular scientific claim only studies things that have nothing to do with that particular scientific claim, then they're really denying themselves access to information they might find convincing, right? But I don't think that they can control what actually convinces them. They can only control to a certain degree what information they expose themselves to. So if you think that you can hear something and make a conscious decision, yeah, I'm gonna be convinced by that, or I'm gonna reject that, that would be an interesting conversation that might tie into where we get with free will. So I threw a lot at you, and I know you're getting ready to head out of here. So why don't you have the floor, and you can make any closing remarks that you'd like to, and then whatever you want to do from there.
Yeah, excuse me. Unfortunately, a lot is going to have to be left on the table. So many questions, but again, this I think it was Dr. Norton. Hopefully, we will be able to interact in future conversations. Unfortunately, you joined right before I left, but people based on their dispositions will reject the truth, regardless of what facts are put before them. And if you're going to say that we can't choose what is convincing to us, then the whole atheist movement is going to have to just give up, because they're going to be if people have religious beliefs, it's not based on what convinces them. It's based on these factors that are beyond their control. So what's the point of arguing with people? But the key is that, this is why you can have two people in a room, present them the same facts, and they'll come to different conclusions regardless of what the facts are. The question is, what are the facts? Because even if they come to different beliefs about what's true, the truth is still there. Okay, so there is a truth. So one of them could be correct. And that's the whole point of these conversations, is figuring out what is the truth, the ultimate truth, beyond our individual perspectives, because there is a reality beyond us, and human beliefs do not, bear upon that or affect it. It is what it is. So that's what I would say to that, is that yes, we do based on our emotional preferences, humans in general will reject facts and truth if it is something that makes us uncomfortable. We do this all the time. And the question is, how do we solve that problem? It's not easily solved because it comes from within the agency of the person. This is why free will is so important. We have to be using our free will to the maximum extent. And in my opinion, it's always in our best interest to believe what's true, even if it hurts our feelings, even if it makes us feel uncomfortable. That's why, even though I'm a theist, if someone were to demonstrate to me the absolute truth that God does not exist, then I would like to think that I would change my mind and believe it, because that's what's true. It doesn't matter how I feel about it. If someone showed me that Jesus is a myth, I would have to believe that. I don't believe that anyone has proven mythicism, but if someone did come along and do it, I would have to abandon Christianity, even though it would probably hurt my feelings a little bit because I'm a Christian. But as far as the free will agency discussion, there's just so much. And again, I'm going to close in the next couple minutes here to let the conversation continue. But just I see another 2 minutes here, 1 minute. I really feel like there was a lot of talking past each other, not intentionally so, but there definitely is room for a future conversation. And it wouldn't be a bad idea even to revisit a lot of the topics that were brought up during this conversation, because I feel like we still need to find a firm foundation. So I wouldn't be surprised if we, 3 or 4, or maybe even 5 rounds before we start making progress. But that's fine with me, because these conversations take a long time and it takes a lot to work through them. I would just, when it comes to free will, again, go back to my example. You have an apple and an orange in front of you at a moment in time. Can you actually go one way or the other in a moment in time. The big question tonight we address is, can the materialist worldview account for a reality in which, yes, the answer is yes, you can go option A or option B at a moment in time, which would mean that at that moment in time, the future was indeterminate. In my opinion, materialism is a deterministic worldview. There's no other way to look at it. Another question that arose, the mind-body problem very frequently comes up. How you conceive of the mind, ask the question, what is the mind? What is it made of? What is this relation to consciousness? Yes, our mind, to answer the question of, we have experiments showing that, when you shock this part of the brain, it produces this kind of, that's because the consciousness is interpreting what's coming into its field from the human mind. It's connected to the human body. So if you affect there's an interaction there. There's an interaction going on. So if you do something to the brain, it's going to affect what is the consciousness is experiencing what's happening to the body. So if you affect the body, the consciousness is going to receive that, and it's going to affect the consciousness. So there's no problem there. There can be a dualism there. There can be an independent consciousness, and it also be impacted by what's happening with the physical body. This is the last question I'm going to ask. This is a question we can get to, and all these other questions are good ones. We can get to them in future conversations. If you want to believe in the materialist paradigm, you have to explain consciousness. But consciousness would therefore have to be explained in terms of material, in terms of matter. You really... So next time, let's try to figure out, if we go this way, when it comes to consciousness, and you're a materialist, whoever the materialist out there, what is the material that is the fundamental essence or building block of consciousness in the materialist paradigm? Because if you can't answer that, then we're starting to get into, well, materialism can't solve the problems of free will and what we observe. So I'll end it there. Thank you all.
That was a great conversation, brother. It's always nice to speak to you, and I think we set an excellent example today of people, and we always do this, Ace. We have a great relationship. We disagree on some things fundamentally, and yet we've never had a disrespectful or antagonistic conversation. We've always been polite and respectful, and I think that this is exactly what I'm trying to show people with this YouTube channel. So I do want to remember to tell people, please do. I've seen a lot of new faces in. I'd be so grateful if you would like this stream, subscribe to my channel. But I also want to make sure you guys check out sPhilosophy channel. I do always put a link to my guest channel in the description. And so check out sPhilosophy. He does open panels as well. And he's got some very unique views, which I'm actually in support of a lot of his views regarding soteriology and some other things related to religion and Christianity in particular. So I think that he's got a more reasonable understanding of the relationship between Jesus and Paul and books of the Bible, what should be rejected or accepted, just from consistency perspective. And I'm an agnostic. I'm not a religious person, but just reading the text for consistency, I think Ace has a lot better grasp on that. So I definitely check out his channel. And subscribe.
Can I say one thing objective before?
Yeah, of course.
I want to teach you how to do something. Do you know how to pin the link in the YouTube comments? Because that's where most people are coming from.
No, I don't. I do if I.
All right, wait. Let's walk through this.
Well, I know how to do it if I'm in YouTube, right? But the problem is that can you do it from StreamYard?
No, you can't. You have
that's what I thought. I can do it from YouTube. The problem is that if I do it on my phone, I can't post it on my phone because it doesn't. I can post other people's comments on my phone, but I can't post my own. It just grabs it and wants to copy or paste it. So what I have to do, which I'm not in the habit of doing, is opening up YouTube during this stream, which I actually have a YouTube thing going.
Yeah, what you have to do is you have to open a browser, you have to open the YouTube channel, and you have to post the link in the actual YouTube. If you do it through StreamYard, it won't work. Yeah, and then I pin it. I am actually aware of that. The reason I haven't been doing that is because as soon as I open up YouTube, and go onto the show, it creates a massive lag. And so I don't know why it doesn't seem to be doing that for you when you do it or other people, but for me, it creates this huge lag issue. And so I could just open it up really quickly, post the link, and then shut it down. I'm just not in the habit of doing that, but I do need to do that because you're right. But people seem to be finding it in the comments, and I'll post it. Well, what they can do is the people in the comments, they can actually type that link into their browser manually, and it'll work. But a lot of people. Okay, I see. Okay, I see you've done that. Okay. and then when you go into the YouTube, you can highlight the comments with your mouse and go to the three dots and click pin link, and that way it won't disappear after so many comments, because after so many comments it'll disappear eventually.
Yeah.
So
No, I'm aware of that.
Okay,
The only reason I haven't been doing this, like I said, because as soon as I open up YouTube, it just freaking creates this huge lag issue. And I could open it up, pin it, and then close it. What I was going to do is I was going to just do it on my notebook on a separate computer altogether. That way it would avoid that lag, I think. But I didn't do that today. But I appreciate you telling me. But I am aware of that. So
okay, all right, I got to run. Appreciate you. All right, until next time. Bye.
Yep. Okay, so we will. He's let himself out. Okay, so let me. Oh, I don't want to be the main. Got other people have joined. So what I usually like to do is when people come on, if they've got channels or whatever, I like to give them a chance to introduce themselves and their channels. The only reason I skipped past that today is because A's time was so limited. So I think Scott was the first person. I'm going to go around the room, let everybody introduce themselves and their channels really quick. I know Deconverted Man is in here. I really enjoy his content. So I definitely want to make sure you guys hear about his channel. I've talked to Dan Norton a lot on his channel. So let me give each of you a chance to introduce yourselves, tell people what you're doing on YouTube, and then we'll start the conversation back up again. So Scott, why don't you go ahead and go first? You were first in the room.
All right. Yeah. So my name is Scott. I have a channel called The Mirror Point, and I talk about, philosophy, religion, atheism, skepticism, and other forms of mental masturbation.
That's perfect. Nice, short and sweet. I like it. Chris Moore, I don't know if you do a channel or not. I know that you're in the community all over the place. It's always nice to see you. So go ahead and introduce yourself if you want. Then we'll go to.
No, I don't have anything for like me personally. I'm just somebody that surfs the webs, basically, and that's it.
Yeah, Chris is at a few different channels that I interact with. James Apperson is one I can think off the top of my head, and I think I've seen you in a few other places. It's always nice to see you, Chris. He's been a supporter of this channel pretty much since the beginning, a couple of months ago when I started, and I really appreciate that support and the interaction. Dan, you were next in the room. Why don't you introduce yourself and your channel?
I'm on YouTube at Dan Norton 1, and the theme of my channel is Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, a philosophy of reason, egoism, and capitalism. And I've had some good conversations with Objective Ethics here. And since it's on the topic, I'll also mention that my graduate school work was focused on both free will and consciousness. So maybe we'll get into some more of that today. And I also do a live stream. I'm actually doing my next live stream tomorrow. So if anyone wants to come by, I take calls, I engage with the chats. Probably start around 1 p.m. Pacific time. So you're all welcome to come by. And thanks for having me here.
Always a pleasure to have you, Dan. We've had some great conversations. And I do enjoy hearing the perspectives from Ayn Rand. It's been very inspiring as far as wanting to get in and research some of her stuff. I don't know that I agree with a whole lot of it. Some of it I do. I find it very interesting at any rate. So I'm really glad I met you. And Deconverted Man, do you want to introduce yourself and your channel? You're doing at least one video a day, it seems like. You put out so much content, and you are really funny too. Some of it's serious, but a lot of it is really entertaining. So why don't you tell people where to find you?
Well, I'm sitting in a chair behind my desk. So that's where to find me, technically speaking. But you don't know where the share is, so that makes it hard. But I do have a YouTube channel. You can click on that, I guess. I don't know why I'm talking like this now. Why did I decide to do this accent? I cannot stop the accent now. I don't even know what kind of accent that is. I don't know. Okay, I'm fine now. I'm sorry. I was getting funny because you said funny. And then I forgot what I was going to yell my name, and I was like, nah, I don't feel like it. And then a cat showed up in one of the pictures up here. I don't know. That distracted me for a moment. And I'm confusing the guy with the glasses over there. No, you both have glasses, so that doesn't help anybody. You know what? I don't know. Anyways. I'm Deconverted Man on YouTube. Everybody knows who I am. And if they don't, they probably are glad that they don't want to know me. They hate me. It's horrible. Anyways. So I don't know what we're talking about because I just showed up. But yeah, it looks like free will. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if we do or don't have free will. Like, I know that, what's his face was looking at it. I forget who now. Was it Michael Schimmer? Or no, was, I forget. But somebody was looking into it, like some neurologist or whatever. And I don't know if there's been any consensus scientific view of it. Because I haven't looked into it lately, so I don't know what the science says on it. Like, I guess the problem is you have to first to say, well, what is free will? And I'm like, well, that's kind of the ability to do arbitrary decisions, or at least that's what I think it is. But it's like, okay, well, I pick up lobster that's on my desk, put it on my head. Okay, that seemed like an arbitrary thing, but I had to think about doing that. So was my thinking of it always going to be that, like, if I could rewind time, which I can't do, would I always make that decision? And I don't know, So, and it just does seem to be things I can't choose to not do, like, with the pop-up jump-up scare that happens, in horror movies, or maybe you're watching that car commercial and the monster jumps up at you. You get scared of that, and like you don't have a choice but to be scared. So if we do have free will, it seems limited to some respect, because it seems like sometimes we lose the ability to control what our action to some degree, like flight or flight. Like somebody punches you in the face, like, do you really have the conscious ability to decide what you're going to respond in that moment, or do you just respond without any, like, afterwards? Yeah, but during that time, maybe not, and especially when we get emotional, it seems like we quote unquote lose control. There's murders of passion of the heart murders, things like this happen. So I and then I look at study. There was some study done during the, I think it was the Rodney King riots, when a bunch of people were rioting and stealing, and then those people were asked later on, like, well, why did you do that? And they're like, I don't know. Like, they'd never done anything bad before. They'd never done anything illegal before. They don't even know why they did it. It's just everyone was doing it, so they did it. So what? And then we see that, like, with the people facing backwards in the elevator and the person will turn around. It's like, well, what happened to your free will then? It just seemed to kind of melt away. Like, could you have chosen to not do it? I guess, but most people don't. So maybe some people have more free will than others. Is that possible? I don't know. But I don't know if it does or doesn't exist, or even necessarily like what it is or what the science says. Whatever the science says, I'll be like, okay, yeah, that's what I agree with, in the end. But so that's really my only thoughts on free will. I don't know if any of that was already covered or not. So yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, no, a lot of what you talked about was, and I think it's really important in order to have these conversations, and this is something that Dan and I actually have talked about when we've had our conversations, and something I really enjoy about when I talk to him on his channel or he comes on my channel. He was a guest on this channel, actually. I remember. So please do check out that video. It's posted in my lives, and we had a great conversation. But we talked about Ayn Rand's ethics and a lot about politics, actually, which it was a really fascinating conversation, actually. But free will. What I was trying to say is that in order to have these conversations, one of the things that we ran into with Scott and A's and Chris is the definitions, right? What do we mean by consciousness? And the same thing here. What do we mean by free will, determinism, and compatibilism and stuff? And so, depending on how we actually define that is really going to determine whether we think we actually have it. So the definitions we used for this conversation is based on the libertarian idea of free will, which I've got it running on the ticker, is that decisions can be made free of any external cause or influence. Determinism would be the exact opposite, that all decisions are determined by external cause or influence. And compatibilism is kind of this middle ground. While most decisions are heavily influenced by external cause or influence, there's still room for independent decision-making processes. So that
seems like what I would think.
Yeah, I think
I
right
don't
now,
know if it's true or not, but I mean that sounds closer to what I've observed and read. But I could always be wrong. I don't know.
yeah, I think that and I've just started looking into this more seriously fairly recently. So I'm still admittedly ignorant on the topic itself. I'm basing a lot of this off of just past things I've looked at, but not done a really deep dive into it. But based off of what I've seen, there are studies in neurology, for example, neuroscience, and the scientific field is actually split. Philosophy is actually split. This is kind of like the debate around morality being objective or subjective. It's really split, right? That we're not getting a definitive answer either way, and that kind of surprises me. I thought that neuroscience would have been the definitive, given us the definitive answer about free will, because in neuroscience they do say we can affect we can I was thinking about consciousness. We can measure and track the decision-making process to us and through brain functions, right?
Yeah,
what neuroscience is basically getting to is that determinism is probably not true, but the nearest it can get us to is indeterminism. And again, this is not the consensus, right? So there's arguments to be made on both ways. Robert Sapolsky, who I cited in this video, he actually studies neuroscience, and he's a hard determinist. So this is not like by any sense the view in neuroscience, but a lot of the studies have shown that, okay, maybe indeterminism might be more likely than determinism, but it doesn't get you to free will. They've openly admitted that they have done nothing whatsoever to get over to free will. So what you end up is that things are either determined or they're random, completely random at that point. And I don't think that maps onto what we're seeing. It doesn't seem like everything is so random that it's just complete. It would be just complete chaos out there. We seem to have predictable elements to the way people make decisions. And the decision-making process, it starts, you were talking about, and I'm glad you brought this up, Converted Man, because it's something that I mentioned in my opening kind of statement. It was about the emotions, how decision-making processes, before we get to a point to where we're actually making what we consider to be a decision, that thought, right, physically speaking, the electrochemical processes in the brain, it goes through the amygdala, the limbic system, and then into the prefrontal cortex. So those signals go through the emotions, the part of the brain that handles emotions, before it reaches the part where we make a cognitive choice or decision. And so, like you said, our emotions affect so much, which is why, in fact, in some states, I don't know if it's still the case, I believe it is, but in Texas, I believe it is, if you were to walk into the bedroom and see your marital partner in bed with another person, you have a certain period of time where you can legally shoot that person, and it's not considered murder because it's a crime of passion or whatever they call it. You know what I mean? So we recognize scientifically, and even in some states legally, that the emotions can actually affect our decision-making process, that you jack those emotions up high enough and people literally have no control over their decisions. So I'm glad you brought up emotions in that. And I'm not encouraging any of that. I'm just saying that's just...
Well, I mean, as a joke, I am like, well, like, to prove free will, eat a plate of poo, because nobody would want to do that. Like, so it's like, come on, prove free will. It's kind of a joke because obviously, like, no one's going to do that. And if they do, then I won because I get to watch them eat a plate of poo,
So that's
I win either way.
Ethics.
Yeah.
Are you not familiar with the John Dylan Haynes experiment of 2008?
No, I have not heard of this.
Yeah, so in 2008, it was published in Nature Neuroscience, and it was conducted at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences.
Type it in the chat, because I'm writing this note down, but just to make sure I get did you already put it in the comments?
I will put it down. Hold on, let me try to.
Yeah. I want to make sure, because I'll definitely be looking into this. So I didn't mean to cut you off. I want to make sure everybody else has access to it, because I don't think I'm going to be able to spell Dylan Haynes correctly. So John D.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it in the live chat. I'm just typing it up. There we go. Yeah. Oh, Electro Live. Okay. All right. Yeah, he put it up there. All right. So basically, what they did is they had participants which were placed in like this fMRI scanner. Do you guys know what that is?
Yeah,
but it's basically like a brain scanner.
Right.
And it's like a big old giant tunnel. Looks like a big old giant thing. Anyways, you put somebody in that thing. And so the guy, he freely chooses whether to press a left or right button. Watch. And basically what he's doing is he's watching a stream of letters on a screen. And so he reports the letter present when they become aware of their decisions. So what the researchers measure is the brain activity patterns before the button press. So the reported time of conscious decision is recorded, right? As opposed to the brain patterns. So what they found is that using this like pattern classification of their brain activity, they're looking at like, what do they call it? The frontopolar cortex and the precuneus or something like that, right? So what they could do is they could predict whether a patient would participate or a participant would press a left or right button before he actually does it, up to 7 seconds before
I think I heard of that
consciously
one.
deciding it. And so the accuracy was well above 60%, right? So this shows that before you're even aware of the decisions you're making, you've already made the decision. So if you're counting free will as this intentional conscious thought, then you don't have any free will, according to that experiment.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Scott, because the other issue, and I wanted to bring this up to A's, but we're so short on time today. But so we know also from studies using these same types of this fMRI that when our senses actually how do I say this? We receive the signals at different times. So your sight, your auditory senses, your visual senses, like the optical, the taste, touch, all these signals actually happen at different times, right? But what happens is that the subconscious brain receives all these signals at different times. It organizes all of this and presents one image to the
Unified,
brain, to the conscious brain, right? So the brain. So I think that my hands right now, as I use my hands a lot when I talk, I feel like my hands are moving, my mouth is moving, the sound is coming. All of this, I can hear my words. I feel like it's all happening at the same time, but that's actually an illusion, and we know this for a fact because we can track these signals. Yeah,
this is what neuroscientists mean when they say consciousness is an illusion. Is they're saying that what you're thinking, what you're describing as consciousness isn't really what consciousness is. You see, consciousness is more fundamental than just your awareness at the time. That's the byproduct. The byproduct is the reaction that's going on to the information that's being processed, right? And it's using your brain kind of like an instrument, that's filtering out a whole lot of information. Like you're not even going to see like most of the light spectrum. You're not going to hear most of your. The brain doesn't. It filters stuff out. That's what the brain does. And so when it comes to this question of free will, I think it's just a big illusion. We could say that whatever has the free will, if you want to even call it that, is behind the awareness of your decision making. See, we're telling stories after the fact. Like we're saying, well, the reason I chose the chocolate ice cream was because of this, that, and the other thing. That's just storytelling after the fact. We're rational.
I agree 100%, Scott, 100%. I think that free will is undefensible. Chris, you've been quiet for a while. Dr. Norton, you've hardly had a chance to say anything. So let's work around the room and give you guys a chance. I try to be fair to everybody. So Chris, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Well, my 2 cents on free will and all that stuff kind of boils down to that. Yes, you might quote unquote have free will. However, due to Murphy's Law, it kind of gets lost on contact because it's you versus the world or whatever. How many parties that you want to include yourself to, and other by and other factors. So by the time you get to the end result, you're not as much as having has to have your the will that you want. It's probably adjacent to somebody else's or in direct opposition to somebody else's, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
that
mean-
making sense.
Yeah. Just like we're kind of limited, like even if there is some, like I think like some degree of free will or whatever, like we're limited by our personal tastes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and this is the argument that Sapolsky makes for hard determinism is that because we are the way that our environment and our upbringing affects us so much that our character, I believe, is how he defines it. You know, that our character develops independently from other characters, makes us a unique individual. And this is ultimately what's affecting our decision-making processes. And this can all be tracked to physical processes. There's no room or necessity for free will, according to that argument. And so that's very interesting. Dan, I know you have talked a lot about free will from Ayn Rand's perspective. And I know that Ayn Rand, I think, has a different definition of free will. What do you think about this so far?
I have a lot of thoughts, but to start on the definition issue, I would not characterize free will or libertarian free will as how was it? Decisions are made free of any external cause or influence. I think it was something like that in the ticker.
Decisions can be made free of any external cause or influence.
Right. Yeah, I would not define it that way. I do think there are always influences, like that you have to have a brain and it has to be intact, like not a damaged brain, and you have to have a certain amount of energy. Like if you're running on very low sleep, if you've been awake for an entire week straight without one second of sleep, your brain is not going to be functioning well, and you're not going to be able to control your mind in the way you could if you were well rested. So I do think there are certain circumstances that have to be in place in order for you to exercise control over your minds. So it's not the case that your ability to make choices or exercise your freedom of will is entirely independent of any cause or influence, I would say. And that's just one example. There's a lot of other directions I could go, but maybe I'll pause there. I don't know if you want to steer it in a certain direction.
Well, just what do you guys say? I'll kind of open it up here. So let's just take for the sake of argument here. Does anybody want to engage with what Dan has said about his definition of free will, as opposed to the definition that A's and I have agreed to use for the purpose of our conversation? Or do you guys have a different definition of free will? Does anybody want to touch on that? Because I'm open to have whatever conversation you guys want. For A's and I's debate or discussion, we've agreed to these terms, and these are terms that are used in most circles that I'm familiar with. But that doesn't mean we have to go with this. You know, language is subjective, right? What's important is we're all understanding where we're all coming from. So do you guys have different definitions, or do you want to engage with what Dan has said about his definition of free will?
I agree that if whatever you call free will, like your decision making, your clear decision making, or your intelligent problem solving or novel problem solving, is going to be constrained by the physical forces, like, the things we call physical, like the brain, our bodies, our environment, and all of our, being in the causal link, being in some causal chain, obviously is going to kind of determine what kind of menu you have to select from. But then you have this little degree of freedom to choose among the menu presented, right? Or at least we think we do. And but it could be argued that even your decision based on that menu is based on your wants. And your wants you don't have any conscious control of your wants, I don't think. I think your wants are at least in the short term, your wants are what determines your decisions. So if you say, well, I'll prove that I have free will. I want to drink this soda, but guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to drink this water. Boom, I just proved I have free will. Well, no, you didn't, because your want to prove that you have free will overrode that decision.
Exactly.
So it's a hierarchy.
Exactly.
So you're still enslaved to your wants to some degree.
That's exactly right. That's a point I didn't get a chance to talk to Ace about, but I was going to bring that up next time. Is that so? It's important, and I worded it a little bit differently, but exactly the same thing you're talking about. There's a hierarchical value that we give to. We have basically action is what we see, right, or decision, however you want to say that. Behind that directly is desire, and behind desire is want, right? So you can think about like the example that Scott gave was perfect. Another analogy would be like a drug addict, right? A drug addict takes the action is taking the drugs. The desire is the physical body, right? Telling them, hey, we need these drugs. But then you have to say, well, do you truly want what you desire, right? Do you actually want to be putting poison into your body, or are you doing it because your body is telling you to do it? So want to desire to action. So I think it's really important to understand that there's a hierarchical system here of how we get to action. It's not just from, oh, I decided to do something. I've had a thought. Now I've made a decision. Now I've got action. No, there's so much more that's loaded up behind that. So I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah. I mean, like, whether, the timing to me, I don't know that matters. Like, when I become aware of it, to me, doesn't seem like I'm still my brain. Like, yeah, okay, I have the consciousness and subconsciousness, and I'm not aware of whatever the subconscious is doing. That doesn't matter. It's still me in there. If there is a me, I don't know. So I was like, well, how would we test it? And I'm like, I don't know. And I guess that's probably the problem that science has with this is like, well, you could map out me performing some action and see what that looks like, and then perform like that action in my imagination as opposed to reality, and that would look different. And then me not performing the action, and that would have a map. But then like it's like I don't know how you would test if I'm making that decision at all. And it kind of goes to like, and I've wanted to know this, and I guess we would need a neurologist to ask, and I don't know that they would know the answer. Like, before you reach out with your hand, because I don't actively think, hey, arm, bend in this direction, hand, do this, fingers, none of that I have to think about. I just grab the object. So there's so much going on there that's not conscious.
Well, the best.
So like, how does my brain know to reach the hand in the first place? Like, when did the thought begin?
Example is
great analogy. I actually brought that up to A's. That was part of my opening argument. Is that we have autonomous bodily functions, digestion, right, breathing. Oh, yeah. I don't think to myself, oh, I got to inhale every 2 seconds, right, or I'll freaking pass out from lack of oxygen. No, my body just does this automatically. It's called autonomous bodily functions, right?
Yeah, and, but you can't. Sorry, go ahead.
And I actually, in my rebuke to a philosophy, I basically told him that there's specific parts of the brain that are allocated to specific functions, i.e. motor. Most common is motor. And then there's basically your frontal lobe, which is thinking. Then your logic, which is the left. Creativity, your right. And so on and so forth. I'm not trying to be doing that, but it's just like I said, it's every part of your brain is assigned like a specific role, even though it's not clear borders.
I think the best evidence is going to be first person experience. Like if you ever engaged in mindfulness meditation And if you've ever tried to stop your mind from thinking thoughts, it's damn near impossible. The thoughts, you're going to notice, they just keep coming without your will. If you try to will yourself to stop thinking, I mean, you're basically dead. You're brain dead. You can't will yourself to
Yeah.
be brain dead. So there's, there's aspects of your being that you have no control of, and it has to do with your mentality, your thinking. Even the words we say, we don't like, if you're typing out words on a piece of paper or when you're chatting with someone, you give a lot of thought to what your next word you're going to spell out is. But when we're sitting here talking, we're kind of like freestyling off the dome, right? We're kind of just spitting off the words, so to speak. We're not really giving a lot of thought to what we're saying. We just have a general idea, and something unconscious is sort of driving the words to come out. And a lot of that has to do with our habits of speaking. It has to do with our training, what vocabulary that we have in our arsenal of words and things like that. So there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes we're just not fully aware of at any given point in time. And I think if that's what you mean by free will, is that conscious, intentional control of every little single thing that you think and behave, then you wouldn't have free will, or at least it would be constrained to a big degree.
Yeah, and,
Yeah,
and I agree with everything you said there, Scott. Dan, you said you had quite a bit to say, and you just got a chance to just basically go over the definition. Why don't you go ahead and get into some of the thoughts that you had? Because I know that you're highly educated in this particular field specifically, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah, I was just going to reply to something that, sorry, I don't know your name in the hat.
Scott.
Scott. Yeah, something he just said, I triggered a thought. So I think it's correct that we don't have control over every little thing about our actions, like what particular word pops into our mind at a given time. But I think it is plausible that we have control over our level of focus. This is Ayn Rand's distinctive theory of free will. For her, the core of our freedom is our ability to exercise our minds, i.e., our rational faculties, or not. Sometimes she puts it as the choice to think or not, or the choice to focus or not. You could also put it as the choice to follow reason as opposed to allow your emotions to dictate how you act. And that is really the root of what's under our control. And if we do control our minds, then it's more likely that certain thoughts are going to occur to us than others. It's like if I'm in focus right now, it's more likely that thoughts about free will or metaphysics are going to pop into my mind next. Whereas if I'm just kind of out of focus and allowing my mind to drift, then maybe some thought about what I ate for dinner last night is going to pop up into my mind. Something that's not really relevant to the discussion of free will. But I can choose to focus my mind. And if I do that, then more relevant thoughts are going to occur to me. And like the exact particular thought that pops up into my mind, I don't have control over that. But the more general category of relevant thoughts, I do have control over that by virtue of my ability to choose my level of focus. So that's one key point that I would make.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because it seems like the more awareness or focus you put on something, it seems like the more directed you can actually make your problem solving, or the speed at which you accomplish a goal, or even form goals at all. It seems like it requires focus. When you're out of focus, you seem to go more on automatic. And so you can sort of measure what you're talking about there. I agree with that.
A lot of the other functions, like you had mentioned breathing before, the human body does have automatic functions like digestion and respiration. And Ayn Rand actually explicitly contrasts those with the nature of the mind. So whereas many of the body's functions are automatic and not under our volitional control. Our minds is, on her view at least. But it's not to say everything is in our control. Some things are.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully will get a good lawyer and we'll get him out of jail so he can be free. Anyways, I gotta go. I'm gonna go now. Goodbye, everybody. Hopefully you'll
Later.
figure out the universe. Good luck.
I'll get back to you on it.
Yeah, Hey, I'm sure you guys will figure it out. All right.
We'll figure it
Take
out.
care. Bye.
It's always good to see you, Dan. Dan, I like to, in fact, I do want to give everybody a chance to have some closing remarks and talk about their channels or whatever they want to do. I had a problem at work this morning, but I made it clear to all the employees that I will not put out any fires on Sunday afternoon because I've already dedicated myself to this stream. So they're going to have to figure it out until I get there. So I do actually have a fire to go put out here in a little bit. So just be aware of that. In about 15 minutes, I actually have to shut this down and go deal with the children. This sounds more like compatibilism than actual free will. And Ayn Rand, obviously highly educated herself. She must be familiar with compatibilism. And this debate's been happening in philosophy for a couple thousand years. So has she just kind of hijacked compatibilism then? Or is this like unique to what's a position in Ayn Rand's philosophy? Are there three distinct positions: free will, compatibilism, or determinism? Or does she see it as a black and white dichotomy?
She talks in terms of free will versus determinism. She doesn't use the term compatibilism, but I think she would reject that position. That's the view that free will is compatible with determinism. And I think it's pretty clear that she rejects that they are compatible. Either you're free or you're determined, but you can't be both. So she would reject compatibilism, although she doesn't use that term explicitly. That's my understanding.
I think Ayn Rand, she really saw freedom as a virtue, like the freedom of autonomy, the freedom of self, like the virtue of selfishness, this virtue of taking care of one's self in order to project one's freedom, right?
Well, there's political freedom.
Yeah, she was really big on that.
So political freedom is a different sense than freedom that is meant in freedom of the will. That's metaphysical freedom, which is what we're talking about. But she was in favor of both kinds. Like, she thought human beings metaphysically were free in the sense of they have free will. They can choose path A or path B. They're not determined to go down one particular path. But also in the realm of politics, she favored freedom as opposed to coercion. So the contrast in the political realm would be with coercion. The contrast in the metaphysical realm would be with determinism. So they're not entirely unrelated, but they are different senses of the term freedom.
And you're right about the virtue of selfishness too, Scott. You mentioned that, and that's one thing I have seen about from Ayn Rand, and it is true. And I don't want to detract too much from this conversation, but I do agree with this. It's really important. I don't necessarily the terminology, and the thing about Ayn Rand that I'm finding as I'm looking into her is that she has a very, what seemed to be anyway to me, is a unique way of defining certain things. Selfishness, for example. We tend to think of that as a derogatory or negative thing, right? Selfishness. And we use that in a very negative term. We'd say, don't be so selfish, But selfishness, if it's just the idea that you consider yourself first, but at a reasonable level, well, then it makes sense, because as I've told people, altruism doesn't make any sense, because if you're going to completely sacrifice yourself for others, you're only going to have an opportunity to do that one time, right? In life. That's it. Then you're dead. So that doesn't even make sense. You cannot be altruistic to the truest sense. You got to take care of yourself at some level, right? Otherwise you're not able to take care of other people. So even if, like, with my view on the way that we ought to function in the world, I believe that all people are equal. We ought to treat and look at people as equals, right? As we all share this humanness with agency, which is where I derive my objective moral principles from. But at the same point in time, that doesn't mean that we have to put others entirely above ourselves, because it just doesn't make sense, practically speaking. If I don't feed and clothe myself, I am of no value to my neighbor whatsoever. I can only be valuable to one other person, and then I'm going to starve to death, or I'm not going to, be able to function anymore. I won't have a place to sleep because I gave away my house or whatever. At what point are you going to put other people first? So I do believe that there's a certain element of quote unquote selfishness that we just practically need to have if we want to be considered a giving, selfless person. We still have to be selfish enough to eat first before I feed somebody else, or I'll starve to death, right? So it's how Ayn Rand defines these things seems to be a little inconsistent with the way we use these terms in day-to-day life, I think.
Well, one of the things that I observe about Ayn Rand, if it has been a long time since I read Ayn Rand stuff, I think that she grounded everything in rational and be the rational being.
Reason.
If I remember that right, is that correct?
In reason, yeah.
In reason, right? Like she was all about reason and rationality, and I think that's where a lot of arguments can be made that human beings are not rational beings. First of all, human beings rationalize, but they're not rational beings at the core. Fundamentally, human beings are like any other process in nature. They're geared towards fitness payoffs. They're not geared towards metaphysical truths or the big capital T philosophy, truth philosophies, or things of that nature. Human beings are in the game of finding what's useful for their survival and their procreation and their well-being. So, and then you could say, well, that's a rational basis. But what I'm saying is in the metaphysical sense, that the human being is not necessarily, it could be argued that he's not necessarily a rational being fundamentally.
Well, those technically what you just described, Scott, are essentially just add-ons as we kind of developed society pretty much over time.
Yeah, they layered over who we are, yeah.
Pretty much. Or another point, the storytelling that we kind of made for ourselves, which is fiction, but still useful. Anyway, I better go. Thanks for having me. Yeah, hope you guys have a nice day.
Well, Chris, I appreciate.
All right, man. Nice to see you, Chris.
I appreciate you giving feedback. It's always nice to have you interact with the guests because you're coming from different angles, and so you bring out different things to think about. You inspired a lot of conversation today. I'm really glad you joined us.
All right, see ya.
On that last point, I was thinking, well, is everything you just said then a rationalization? If you're not a rational being, should I just ignore it?
Exactly. That's the paradoxes.
Oh, you broke up for a second. I couldn't hear.
Oh, sorry. I was just agreeing. Yeah, I'm just rationalizing everything. Like that's what we do. We're storytellers. We look for what stories seem to sound better based on our experiences. Like, the story of the world, the creation of the world. 2,000 years ago, it made perfect sense to make the story of Adam and Eve. But now with our scientific knowledge about this and that and evolution and nature, now that story isn't so pleasant. It isn't so coherent. But then our paradigms always shift anyways, like say like the way light works or gravity worked back in Newtonian days. Well, since Einstein, we've shifted from that. Now we know that gravity isn't a force, that, it's more like space-time bending. But now we have quantum gravity ideas and things like that. And so they're sort of like useful fictions. They're sort of like useful fictions to describe the world in storytelling. And a lot of people take science so serious as if they're doing metaphysical truth-telling. They're not. They're just solving problems. They're just telling stories. And I'm not discounting science. It's a great tool. It gets us all the inventions we need and the things we need to do. But when it comes to ideas and these bigger questions, in some cases, it's not the right tool. Sometimes science is mainly in the game of describing things like map making, but oftentimes we mistake the map for the territory. And so we think that reality is the numbers that we use to describe the reality with, you know, instead of remembering where all this stuff came from. Like the only thing we really know, the only thing that's really concrete, I think, is just our experience. That's the only thing we can ground on. But even that tells you that you can be mistaken and that you can be fallible. So, yeah.
I think there might be something self-refuting about the view that everything is just a rationalization, because then the view that everything is a rationalization is a rationalization. So I can't really trust that. So I think there's, and this also is true of skepticism, and like the view that we can't really know anything. Okay, well then you can't really know that you can't really know anything. So it's a self-refuting kind of position.
I understand that. And, you know, we have tools like mathematics that sort of transcend some of our limitations and that sort of override some of our intuitions, because our intuitions will always tell us one thing about the world, and then we'll turn around and through, you know, accurate equations, we'll learn something, right? But then even those things, if history is a guide at all, it should teach us that we're constantly learning and refining and building, and sometimes even overthrowing old paradigms. So I like to think that we're rational to some degree, you know, that we can progress, you know, otherwise what's the point, right? So I get it, but I think it's also demonstrable, it's very demonstrable that we're not always as rational as we think we are. You know, we all have biases, cognitive bias. We rationalize things based on what we want to believe. We're good for arguing for our point. Like me and objective ethics, we were talking about that last week, how a lot of people are really good at like arguing against objective morality, for example. But they don't really engage your arguments. They're just really good at parroting things that they've heard, and vice versa. It do it, you know, it's part of what we do. We're not always that rational, just fundamentally. But, you know, the hope that I have is that we can become more rational. We can engage in a project of philosophy and metaphysics and science, and we can get better at it.
I think it's definitely possible to be rational or irrational, and that's actually what free will amounts to. It's this basic choice to focus our mind. That's the means by which we are rational, but that doesn't happen automatically. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, allow themselves to be dictated by their emotions rather than their reason. But I think that that's just because they're choosing to. It's not that they're necessitated to. So I think we are the rational animal, as Aristotle defined human beings, in the sense that we can be rational, and that is our fundamental defining characteristic. But it's up to us whether we exercise that fundamental defining characteristic. It doesn't happen just automatically.
I'm wondering if ontologically, if reason would be prior to want, is we know it's got to be obviously prior to desire, right? If we think of desire as consequence from the external, you know, the results, the consequence of action. So that's desires. Our body wants something, and then whatever our body wants, it, if we give it to it, there's going to be a consequence to it. That's the end game. But is reason located in between want and desire, or does reason precede want? Do we reason through our wants into our desires? Because I don't think that we do. I think that our wants precede our reason. In my opinion, you know, our wants tend to be more fundamental, and this tends to be more determined, in my opinion. And reason is something that we get our wants determined based on our character, as it was described before, that the type of human being that were developed to be, how we respond to previous experiences. This feeds into the subconscious that kind of forms our wants. Then we got emotions before that. We kind of have to reason after that. After all that information comes through, then we reason and get from reason to desire. I guess it would depend on where reason falls into the conversation, because reason is what separates us from the other animals, right? In my opinion, is the ability to actually reason through things. Abstraction is another thing. So go ahead.
Both reason and want seem to be emergent from conscious experience. Consciousness, just saying it as a loose term here, I know we haven't really defined it, but I would say that wants and reason are both in that hierarchy. They're emergent properties of consciousness. And you had mentioned earlier, you said you were not making the physicalist argument, right?
Correct.
Because you knew that you couldn't really ground compatibilism and some of the things you guys were talking about in his critique of physicalism. And you were saying, well, first of all, I'm not really making the physicalist argument. So you did a good move there. And you were saying that really you were mainly going to ground it into something like a Platonic form, like geometries and mathematical.
No, I was talking about reality. I'm not. So in the free will discussion, I actually do think that that's to be had in the material world, or the material argument. But I'm not a materialist myself. I'm not a strict materialist. I believe that I don't claim. I'm not talking about the Platonic realm of forms, but you could, just for an analogy, use that, and I would be okay with it. But I believe that at the fundamental level, the metaphysical level of all reality is mathematics. And I'm not talking about the language that we invented, but I'm talking about what mathematics actually represents, what numbers represent. I believe that mathematics is actually the fundamental thing that underpins all reality, and everything boils down to geometric shapes. That's where I come from, the naturalist view. And I also, because I'm an agnostic, I do believe that if we do come to some kind of evidence that there could be some kind of a thing that we would say, well, this kind of points to a God, I believe it would end up being a natural explanation to things. Somehow consciousness being fundamental, in my opinion, would lead towards what people attribute to a God concept. But I don't think that we would ever have any capacity to recognize anything supernatural. That's where I remain agnostic about it. I don't think if there's a supernatural being out there, I don't think we'll ever know one way or the other. So I think that anything that we actually decide, yes, this is reality, I don't think it has to be material. I think there can be transcendental things. I believe there can be fundamental things that are not part of the material world. And consciousness may very well be one of those things. I'm not convinced, because I think we affect the brain, we affect consciousness. So that seems to be that consciousness is emergent. I would agree with you 100% that reason, rationality, all those things would then be emergent properties from the brain as well. I don't know if they have to be emergent. I mean, I guess you could say they're linked to consciousness, because if we're unconscious, we're not reasoning or rationalizing, right? So I guess I could agree with you there that it would be emergent from consciousness. But as far as the free will argument, I definitely do think that the argument against free will is pinned on a material explanation for how the brain functions itself.
Well, I'm just trying to connect the chain of your argument, basically. So, because free will seems to be based in rationality or reason. You have a reason for choosing one thing over another. And then those reasons emerge from, ultimately consciousness. And you could say, well, it emerges from matter, like the brain. But if you're not a physicalist, you might say it emerges from mathematical structures or geometry, not the language. But I don't know what geometrical structures are or mathematical structures are outside of a description, because even those things like geometries and things like that are describing something that is in our appearance, something that we've observed. We're describing it. We don't see geometries. We don't see this mathematical equations out there. We're conceiving those things in order to describe how the world we see, like the material world, can exist, right? Like we're using these maps, the geometry and the language, the math as descriptors in either case. I'm not sure how that really is a fundamental property. Like when I say something's fundamental, I don't mean like I mean in the sense of, like you can affect charge, you can affect mass, you can affect gravity, all of these things, quantum fields, you can affect these things. These are still considered fundamental properties. In other words, they just are what they are. They don't have to be described in terms of other things. They're just things in themselves. So consciousness, when people use this identity theory, they'll say, well, consciousness is just this process, or it's just this thing, or it's just that. They're always describing consciousness in terms of something that it's not. And what I'm proposing is, why not just say, just like mass, spin, and charge and all this other stuff, why can't experience, quality of experience, just be its own thing? It's just what it is. It doesn't have to be explained. And a lot of people say, well, that's just a tautology. Well, reality is a tautology. It's like, the universe. You could ask the question, well, why does, I had a conversation with Joel last weekend about that. He was saying, well, when you say things are fundamental, like mass, spin, charge, consciousness, you're basically saying these things exist for no reason. They just are. And I would agree. They just are what they are, right? And he says, well, that's magical thinking. But that's not magical thinking, because those things already exist. They're the premise. They're the axiom of the unit. Like, you don't ask, it may be a bad question to ask, what is the reason for existence? It just exists. There doesn't have to be a reason. Reasoning is something humans try to do. That's something we're engaged in as human beings, right? And so maybe this whole hard problem of consciousness really isn't a problem at all. It's a limitation of our concepts, And so that's what I'm saying about grounding free will and all of these things more into consciousness would probably make more sense, because we're talking about a true irreducible grounding rather than just some feeling,
I got it, you guys. I'm so sorry. I just got a text from work. They are really shitting their pants over there. I got to get over and deal with this, and I need a shower before I do that. So I'm going to have to shut it down. You guys want to have one quick, and please do make it somewhat quick, but I want to give you each a chance for talk about your channel, whatever we haven't discussed. How about Scott? Go ahead and go first, and then
check me out at the Mirror Point. I do a live every Saturday at 12 noon. Me and my co-host Sophia, and we talk about all these things, and we like to masturbate like that. So that's what it is.
Always good to see you. Tell Sophia I said hello, and you guys are always welcome to stop by. It's always good to see you, brother.
Thank you, man.
Dan, go ahead and introduce your channel if you haven't already, and any final words. And I appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. I'm at Dan Norton 1 on YouTube. Do live streams once every 5 days. I'll be doing one tomorrow in the afternoon Pacific, and I invite anyone to come by, and we talk a lot about Ayn Rand's philosophy.
Thank you so much. So I usually try to do a little bit of an outro here. I don't know. I'm feeling kind of pressured now, getting all these calls from work, and now my mind is distracted. I got to figure out what I got to do with that. So let me see if I can wrap this up in a little bit of a bow. The conversation between A's and myself, we're definitely going to be having this continue. I will reach out to him and find out what his schedule's like, and maybe we'll do this like maybe once a month, because it's going to be, there's so much to unpack here with this free will conversation. And A's really loaded this up, and I'm not being critical at all. I'm really excited to get into this stuff with him, but he really loaded it up with the atheist worldview has to be false, and this proves creationism, or proves free will, proves the mind and stuff. And that's really strong language. I don't think that was substantiated, frankly. I think he got into some arguments, but I don't think anything was actually substantiated. So I'm really curious and looking forward to seeing how he's going to flesh that out. I enjoyed speaking with A's every chance I get. He's like I said, we disagree on a lot of things, but I think at the end of the day, he is seeking for truth. And I think that's what we're all trying to, hopefully that's what we're all trying to do. So please do check out. I got A's channel linked in the description. I'll try and get some other channels linked. Deconverted Man, he's a really nice guy, very funny. He actually wrote the song that I use for the outro that I'm going to play here in a second. He's very creative, and that was very generous of him to do that for me. I didn't ask him to do it. Obviously, I was quite surprised when he sent that to me, and so I really appreciate that. Really grateful to everybody who stopped by today. We actually had quite a nice audience. There's so much great chat going on. There's a lot of comments I wanted to address, but I'm just out of time to do it now. So I do hope you guys will come back for another show. Next week, I'm having Claire on. She is an agnostic like myself. I've not really had a whole lot of interaction with her. I saw her talking on another friend's channel. I thought, oh, this lady sounds kind of interesting. So I'm always opening up the platform to different views. And I had reached out to her, and she seems very well read in politics, and she has a pretty interesting view on, I don't know, I guess you should say ethics and religion. She identifies as an agnostic, but I think her and I are using that term differently, which is fine. I see that happen all the time. It's atheism, agnosticism. It's people use these terms like umbrella terms, and they get covered so many different ways. Agnosticism is actually the belief. It covers both faith and knowledge, which a lot of people don't realize. Technically speaking, people can identify however they want, but agnosticism is neither belief nor disbelief in any gods. So you've got your belief there, but what agnosticism truly makes it unique and different from soft atheism is the fact that as an agnostic, I don't think it's possible to know about any gods or supernatural phenomenon. That's the agnostic claim, and that's where gnosis comes from, is we can't know one way or the other, which is why we don't make claims there is or isn't a God. So I don't think that's how Claire is using the term agnostic, but we'll find out next week. She has a model. I don't know if she calls it a philosophical model or a political model or an ethical model based on what she calls secular Quranism. I believe the Quran promotes the Noahide laws, the 7 Noahide laws. And some of those laws have to do with like blasphemy and things of that nature. So I'm not sure how you get to agnosticism to the Noahide laws. That'll be interesting conversation to have with her. So I hope you guys tune in for that, and bring your political views, your theistic views, whatever you'd like. And she definitely is willing to address people and defend her position. I've seen a couple of her videos, and she definitely is willing to stand up for herself. So come with whatever your pushback is. Same thing with myself. I'm always willing to listen to your guys' criticisms about my views. I believe in objective morality. As an agnostic, that's kind of an outlier position in the skeptic community, and I get a lot of pushback. I've tried so many times to come up with a syllogism for my argument, and I've had so many people point out the flaws and different premises and stuff, which I really appreciate, and I take that all very well. So don't feel like you're going to hurt my feelings by pushing back on things I say. I encourage the criticism. I'd like to be agreeable on things. I'd like to, come to some understanding of things. But at the end of the day, I want to be thinking critically, and I want to encourage everybody else to do the same. If we're afraid to question the things that we believe, if we're afraid at pushback, if we're afraid of rejection, then we're doing ourselves a huge disservice if we're really looking for truth, right? I want to promote and support diversity, which means we have to encourage different ideas, even if we have to agree to disagree on some things, right? The thing that we need to agree on is, like you guys have heard me say 1,000 times, I'm going to say it 1,000 more times, is the thing we really need to be agreeing on is respect. We're all human beings. We all need to be respectful of each other and to each other, even when we're in disagreement. That's fundamental. We're all at the same starting point, right? And so we all have the same rights to our freedom and well-being, and my freedom stops where yours starts, right? That's the old saying. So thank you so much to everybody who joined the stream today. I'm going to play this outro that Deconverted Man wrote for me, and I hope to see you guys next Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern, and I'll open up the panel at some point for anyone to join who wants to. And one last plug really quick. I did a video called Courage Without Fear. If you haven't seen that yet, I would really ask that you watch that video, and please share it with anybody you know who's struggling with a difficult time. I really think that we have to find a benefit to overcoming our suffering and our struggles, and we all are going to experience these things in life. So I made a video. I've been told by many people it's very inspiring. And what makes it inspiring is part of the comments that are being left. Share your own experiences with how you've overcome a difficult time. It's only like a 25-minute video. I think you'll find it really enjoyable if you do watch it. And please do share it with somebody you know who's struggling yourselves. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Let me calculate my odds of getting a big YouTube channel. 3.30 through repeating, of course. That's better than I've done before. And Deacon Brennan, Willard, what do you do? Wait, objective ethics will be on your plate.